There are places in the jungle where maps don't show and where people never return. We slept next to one of them. I never believed in the sort of things people whisper about around campfires. The half-forgotten stories of men vanishing in the backcountry, or the unnerving sensation of being watched by the forest itself. But Montana has a way of changing your mind. The Bitterroot Mountains stretch endlessly, jagged and indifferent. And last fall, I was a geology student sent to catalog mineral formations near a remote glacial lake, one that locals only referred to in murmurs, with an uneasy glance at the tree line. I drove in with a university crew at first, a handful of grad students and a teaching assistant, all of us eager to poke and prod at rocks and soil, to mark our GPS points and measure sediment layers. But the plan changed the second day. My group had to leave for another survey site, leaving me alone with a camp near the lake's edge, an RV parked on a narrow dirt path I wasn't sure anyone had traveled for weeks. The mountain air smelled of damp pine and the subtle, acrid scent of mineral runoff, something that stung the back of my throat and clung to my clothes. The lake itself stretched like a black glass mirror, perfectly still, unnervingly so. It reflected nothing, not the moon, not the stars, not even the canopy above. My first thought was that I was tired, that my eyes were playing tricks, but the effect persisted, night after night. At first, I tried to ignore it. I set up my equipment along the shore, measured water temperatures, noted the geological oddities of the basin. But there was a dissonance, subtle at first. The air seemed heavier, closer to the water, almost viscous, and sounds behaved strangely. My boots would splash in shallow pools, but the echoes didn't match the impact, a fraction delayed or entirely absent. Sometimes, a breeze would ripple the surface, but there was no reflection of movement, no moonlight streaking across the lake. Even the fog that rolled in from the surrounding pines refused to leave a shadow on the water. By the third evening, I felt watched. I had assumed it was just the mountain, the loneliness pressing against my thoughts. Yet I began noticing things that didn't add up. Rocks on the shoreline seemed displaced when I returned from short excursions. I would pack my backpack in the morning, and when I returned from taking a soil sample, it would be slightly off-center, or a tool would be missing. Not taken far, not stolen in the human sense, just shifted. The wind? Maybe. Animals? Possibly. But there was a subtle logic to the disturbances that suggested intentionality, a pattern I couldn't name. The first real encounter happened at night. I woke to the sound of water lapping softly, not at the shore, but against the hull of the RV. I pressed my forehead to the window, straining to see through the darkness. The lake had no reflection that night, just a black surface absorbing the moonlight around it. Then I noticed it, movement beneath the water. Not waves, not ripples, but a slow, deliberate shifting, like something large and hidden just beneath the surface. My pulse quickened, and I thought of calling someone. Cell service was non-existent. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but I was drawn to it, compelled. By morning, I tried to rationalize it. My instruments hadn't recorded anything unusual. The sediment samples were normal. Yet the feeling remained, an undercurrent of unease that clung to me like wet clothes. I explored the area on foot, marking rock outcrops, cataloging the mineral veins, yet the lake followed me. No matter which direction I turned, the black water remained in my peripheral vision, impossibly still, impossibly present. Even the birds avoided the lake. Not a single crow, no small songbirds perched along its edge. Silence, broken only by my own breathing and the occasional groan of distant trees swaying in wind I could feel on my face but never see. By the fourth day, the psychological weight began to manifest physically. I woke drenched in sweat, my heart racing from dreams I barely remembered but knew were real enough to leave bruises on my memory. Shapes moved just beyond the tree line. Shadows flitted across my peripheral vision, blacker than the night, as if the darkness itself had substance. I began setting small traps, markers in the dirt, hoping to observe what or who was moving near the camp. Each morning, the markers were disturbed. Not always in the same way. Some were tipped, some carried just slightly down the slope, as if something had investigated them cautiously, curiously, but never destructively. The lake grew more oppressive. When I knelt at the water's edge to collect a sample, I saw my reflection, or thought I did. At first, it was just an absence, the familiar contours of my face swallowed by darkness. Then, subtle distortions appeared. My eyes seemed too large, my mouth too thin. For a fraction of a second, I was looking at something human, yet impossibly alien, staring back with a patience that chilled me to the bone. I recoiled, my hands trembling, my sample forgotten. It wasn't a hallucination. It couldn't be. The pattern of anomalies was too consistent, too patient. The nights grew longer, colder, fog hugged the lake, curling around the RV and the trees like living smoke. I could no longer trust sound. Rustling could be wind, or something larger, something moving through the shadows with intention. I stopped leaving the RV at night. I barricaded the doors, taped over windows, and still I heard whispers. Not human voices, not words. Vibrations in the air that pressed against my eardrums. Sometimes it sounded like water gurgling under ice, sometimes like fingernails scraping rock. I began to suspect that leaving the lake alone was no longer an option. It was waiting. By the 5th day, fatigue had set in, a gnawing exhaustion that made even standing painful. My journal entries became disjointed, inconsistent. I recorded observations in the daylight, but night erased them from memory. When I tried to speak my thoughts aloud, the words faltered, caught in my throat. Something in the mountains, something tied to the lake, was unbalancing me, warping perception. And then the lake claimed its first physical proof. I had gone to measure sediment density at a shallow point. The water was colder than expected, biting through my gloves. As I knelt, I felt a tug at my ankle, not hard but deliberate. I twisted around, hard in my throat, but nothing was visible. The lake remained black, glassy, indifferent. My sample kit floated away on a current I could not see forming. And in that instant, I felt an awareness, like a mind beneath the surface, observing, calculating, patient. I withdrew hurriedly, but the tug persisted, subtle, undercurrent, as if testing me. Sleep became impossible. I could no longer differentiate between dream and reality. I swore I saw reflections, just for a heartbeat, faces from my past familiar and comforting. Then the water swallowed them again. I started leaving objects along the shoreline to mark my territory. Scraps of rope, a metal can, a notebook. Each morning they had shifted, repositioned, sometimes partially submerged. I was being studied. I could feel it in my chest, a pressure that pressed against ribs and lungs, insisting that I recognized the lake was not passive. Then came the night it tried to take me. I had gone outside to photograph sediment layers under the faint light of the moon. I knelt at the water's edge, camera focused, when the surface shivered unnaturally. The black water rose toward me, subtle at first, almost playful, and then violently, as if it had volume and muscle. My leg slipped beneath the surface, and I felt cold water clamp around my ankle, tugging insistently. I screamed, grabbed for the edge of a rock, tried to pull free, but the lake's pull was deliberate, intelligent, more than simple suction. Panic clawed at me. I don't remember how I escaped, hands scratched, knees bleeding. But when I staggered back to the RV, the lake had returned to stillness, its black glass surface once again unbroken, indifferent, and terrifying. I stayed inside for 2 days, barely eating, barely moving. My journal became the only connection to sanity. I wrote that the lake was alive, that it had intention, that I had touched something it wanted, and that I had survived only by chance, not skill. I recorded coordinates, mineral samples, nothing abnormal in a scientific sense. And yet, I knew. I knew that whatever I had disturbed beneath that dark surface had noticed me, cataloged me, and waited. On the morning I finally left, the RV groaning down the dirt path, I glanced back once. The lake was perfectly still, black as obsidian, reflecting nothing but the dense forest and the empty sky. A small ripple ran across the surface, too subtle to catch with the camera, but I saw it, and I understood that it would wait, endlessly, for the next set of feet foolish enough to come close. Years later, I still hear the lake. In the middle of the night, When the wind is quiet, I feel a tug in my chest, subtle and patient, like the memory of being nearly swallowed. And sometimes when I look in reflective surfaces, a glass door, a puddle, I notice a subtle absence. Not my reflection or just a distortion, something else, patient, waiting. Leaving the Bitterroot Mountains behind didn't erase the feeling of being observed. Even hours away, driving down winding gravel roads, I could sense a presence in my peripheral vision, a subtle pressure like the air itself was charged with anticipation. I tried to explain it to friends and colleagues, but words failed me. Stress, they said, the isolation of fieldwork. Maybe they were right, but I knew it was more than that. The lake had left something behind, an imprint of awareness that no distance could erase. When I returned home, I scoured my equipment. Camera memory cards, sediment samples, GPS logs. Everything seemed ordinary, as if my experience had been imagined, and yet one photograph chilled me to my core. I had taken it while kneeling at the lake's edge, the black water in the frame just beyond my focus. At first glance, it was normal, the rocks, the surrounding pine forest, the faint light of dawn. But in the very center of the lake, a subtle distortion appeared, a shape darker than the black water, outlined ever so faintly, almost like smoke curling in reverse. I hadn't noticed it when taking the shot. I tried to forget it. I went back to classes, to research, to normal routines, but sleep remained impossible. Dreams of the lake haunted me. Black water rising, hands that weren't mine clawing at my ankles, whispers in a language I didn't understand but felt compelled to obey. Every time I awoke, the room smelled faintly of wet pine, the air heavy with mineral tang, and the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than natural. I began leaving lights on, avoiding mirrors, avoiding puddles of water, but the feeling persisted. Months later, curiosity, or something darker, drove me back to Montana. I rented an RV, drove up the same old dirt path, and found the lake as I had left it. Black, still impossible. The forest was silent, the air heavy with that same oppressive weight. I wanted to tell myself that I was there for scientific reasons, that I would gather more sediment samples, more photographs, but deep down I knew I was drawn by something more primal, something that had marked me, or perhaps chosen me. I parked the RV at the edge of the water and stepped out. The black surface reflected nothing, not the sky, not the tree line, not even my own form. I knelt and let my fingers touch the water. It was colder than I remembered, but something else ran through it, a subtle vibration, a pulse, a heartbeat I couldn't explain. The lake was alive, not with flesh or fin, but with awareness. It was watching, waiting, assessing. I could feel it moving beneath me, at the water shifting with intention, trying to communicate, or perhaps to test my reaction. I spent days at the edge, recording everything, documenting subtle changes. Rocks that had been static moved slightly each morning, sediment shifted in impossible ways, and the air seemed to thicken around the lake. One night, fog rolled in, dense and choking. I could barely see my hands in front of my face, and the lake seemed to expand, stretching further than its natural boundaries. Something moved beneath the fogged surface, something that wasn't human, wasn't animal, and yet understood me. It whispered then, or I imagined it did. Low vibrations, almost imperceptible, like a faint tapping of fingernails against stone. I could sense its patience, the way it observed and waited. I tried to leave, but the path back to the main road seemed longer, distorted, as if the forest itself had grown, extending the mountains to keep me inside. By the third night, hunger and exhaustion weighed heavily, but I could not bring myself to move away from the edge. My entire being was drawn to the lake, my rational mind screaming to flee, my body frozen by a compulsion I did not understand. The first time I nearly drowned, I had been taken by surprise. This time, it was deliberate. I knelt at the water's edge to collect a sediment sample, and the water pulled me down slowly, gently, as if inviting me into its depths. I resisted, clawing at rocks, at roots, at the thin layer of earth along the shoreline, but it was patient. It let me survive, tested my strength, my fear. When I finally staggered back, soaked and trembling, I noticed something impossible. Footprints along the shoreline, not mine, perfectly human, leading away from the water, then vanishing into the fog. By the fifth day, my mind began to fracture. I started speaking to the lake, aloud, asking questions, offering explanations. No words came back, yet the water responded. Subtle ripples, barely perceptible movements, changes in temperature against my skin, vibrations in the air around me. I could feel its intention, its intelligence, something beyond simple awareness. It was learning me, mapping my fear, testing my endurance, assessing the possibility of patience versus panic. I tried documenting it all, photos, audio recordings, detailed journals, but each morning, evidence would shift. Objects left on the shoreline would be repositioned. My notes would be damp in impossible ways, ink smeared by water I could not see. Sometimes I thought I heard voices in the forest, not quite human, echoing the cadence of my own speech. Perhaps it was mimicry, perhaps delusion, or perhaps the lake had learned to replicate what it observed, bending perception to its will. It wasn't malicious, not in the human sense. It was deliberate, intelligent, patient. It had no need for cruelty. Observation was enough. Survival for it seemed to be a test, and I was its subject. My compulsion to return, to approach, to study was the proof. The lake didn't need to chase me. It could wait indefinitely, and I knew, deep in my chest, that it would. When I finally left, staggering back to the RV, exhausted beyond reason, the fog rolled back into the tree line. The lake returned to stillness. Black, glassy, indifferent. But I was changed. Each time I close my eyes, I feel the pull of that cold, silent surface. I hear the whispers in the wind, subtle vibrations that hint at a presence just beyond sight. And I know that if I ever return, even decades later, it will be there, patient, waiting. Not to harm, not to kill, but to observe, to remember, and to draw me in again. This second segment continues the psychological tension, deepens the narrator's isolation and obsession, and increases the sense of intelligence and patient menace of the lake. After returning home, I thought distance would save me. I thought leaving the Bitterroot Mountains behind would sever the connection the lake had imposed. But it didn't. Even in the middle of a bustling university lab, I felt its presence. It was subtle at first, a shiver when my hand brushed a metal surface, a sudden drop in temperature when I walked past a puddle in the parking lot, but it became impossible to ignore. I started seeing black shapes in reflective surfaces, fleeting glimpses that vanished the moment I blinked. My colleagues noticed my distraction, my pale, hollow-eyed demeanor, but when I tried to explain, words failed. Who would believe that a lake, a body of water, could hold intelligence, could stalk you, could wait patiently for decades if necessary? Sleep was a battle. Every dream returned me to that shore, the black surface still and patient. My own hands would appear in the water, not as I remembered them, but distorted, elongated, twitching in ways that made me recoil. Shadows moved just beyond my peripheral vision in the dorm room I had converted into a temporary study space. I began isolating myself, avoiding contact with mirrors, windows, puddles, even water bottles became suspect. Every time I drank, I felt the weight of that lake, the subtle pull at my chest, the reminder that it remembered me. Compulsion drew me back. I couldn't explain why, but I booked a small research grant, rented an RV, and drove the same twisting gravel roads back into the mountains. The forest welcomed me with the same oppressive silence, the same heavy air, the scent of wet pine and mineral runoff clinging to everything. Even the dirt path to the lake felt longer, stretched as if the mountain itself wanted to make my approach difficult. Each step toward the black water was deliberate, my mind battling rational fear with something more primitive: curiosity, awe, dread, and the undeniable pull of recognition. I arrived at the shore at dusk. The lake, unsurprisingly, reflected nothing. Moonlight hovered over the surface, swallowed whole by the blackness. I knelt, dipping my hands carefully into the water, expecting cold light, but what I felt was something different. A subtle pulse, a heartbeat beneath my palms. It wasn't violent, not aggressive. It was aware. I could feel it stretching its perception beneath me, following my fingers as if they were threads to be studied. I tried to pull my hands away, but a stubborn current held them lightly, insistently. Panic surged, but it wasn't immediate danger that gripped me. It was fascination. I couldn't look away. That night, the fog rolled in thick and suffocating. Visibility dropped to nothing. I lit a small lantern near the shoreline, and the water responded. Ripples formed in precise, circular patterns, concentric waves radiating outward without wind, without impact. I had never seen water behave like this. My mind screamed that I should retreat, that the lake's patience was not benevolence. It was testing, mapping, learning. But something in me resisted. Something compelled me to stay, to record, to measure, to understand. The first direct encounter came silently. A ripple formed beneath my knees, spreading across the shoreline, and I felt the water pull upward with subtle pressure. My legs sank. Not violently, but enough to unsettle my balance. I grabbed at the rocks and soil, trying to maintain control, and the lake responded, not aggressively, but with deliberate resistance. Every instinct urged me to flee, yet I was frozen, caught in a strange equilibrium where fear and compulsion intersected. I realized then that leaving might not matter. It didn't matter if I walked away or ran screaming through the forest. The lake would wait, and it would remember. In those hours, I began hearing voices, or something like voices. Low vibrations, melodic and rhythmic, echoing words I didn't understand, yet shaped like my own speech. I whispered into the fog, trying to imitate, to test, and the lake responded. Ripples spread in acknowledgement, shadows danced just beyond sight, and a sense of measured curiosity settled over me. It was observing, cataloging, but also communicating in ways that defied language. My rational mind broke under the pressure of understanding, trying to rationalize what could not be rationalized. I attempted to document the phenomenon scientifically. I set up cameras, motion detectors, audio recorders, even deployed small buoys to measure temperature fluctuations. Every morning I discovered anomalies. Cameras were submerged, repositioned, audio files distorted with faint rhythmic pulses, buoys shifted slightly from their original placements. Nothing destructive, nothing violent, but all deliberate, intelligent, patient. It was as if the lake itself knew how to leave traces just enough to prove awareness, but not enough to fully reveal itself. The final night at the lake brought the culmination of fear and obsession. I stepped closer to the water than ever before, kneeling at its edge with instruments in hand. Fog enveloped me, the forest disappeared, leaving only blackness and a faint reflection of my heartbeat in the chilled air. The water pulsed beneath my fingers, and then the surface rose slightly, a gentle but undeniable lifting motion. I felt weightless, drawn downward, not forcibly, not with violence, but with insistent, deliberate persuasion. My instruments floated toward me, as if the lake wanted to teach me something, to show me the depth of its awareness. I struggled, half falling into the black water, half stumbling backward. Panic overtook fascination. The pull persisted, tugging not at my body, but at the edges of perception, at the corners of thought. It was patient, so patient that I realized in that moment that it did not need to drag me fully under. It only needed to remind me of its presence, its reach, its memory. I clawed my way to the shoreline, gasping and bleeding from jagged rocks, knees bruised, mind reeling. The lake settled instantly, returning to its glassy, indifferent state. I left the mountains the next morning, driving through fog and forest with a new awareness, a lingering imprint. The lake remained behind, black and still, patient and intelligent, and I carried it with me. In reflections, in quiet ripples of water, in shadows at the edge of vision, I feel its presence. Sometimes, when the wind is still, I hear the pulse of its awareness. The subtle tug at my chest that reminds me it waits. Not to harm, not to kill, but to observe, to remember, to claim acknowledgement. I have returned home, yet I know it will call again. The lake does not forget, and neither do I. Years have passed since that trip back to the lake, yet its shadow lingers over every quiet moment. I tried to return to normal life, classes, research, friends, but the memory of the black water never faded. Sometimes, while walking along a river or glancing at a pond, I swear the surface shifts unnaturally, just for a heartbeat. My reflection wavers, elongates, flickers, and I feel that same pulse beneath my chest, the subtle tug that reminds me of what waits. I've avoided bodies of water whenever possible. Even a simple puddle can trigger that old dread, the sensation that something intelligent and patient lurks beneath, waiting. But it's not just water. Shadows catch my eyes differently now. Movements at the edge of vision feel deliberate. I've caught myself pausing mid-step, convinced something unseen is observing, cataloging, analyzing. Rational thought tells me it's paranoia, the residue of stress and isolation. But rational thought is a fragile shield. I know the truth. The lake is out there, waiting. And somehow it remembers me. The haunting isn't just psychological. A year after leaving Montana, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, no markings, just a small water-stained notebook inside a plastic sleeve. Flipping through it, I recognized my handwriting, but the entries weren't mine. Observations I had never written, sketches of ripples and distortions, small symbols I didn't understand. At the end, a single sentence scrawled faintly in the margins, "We are patient." I didn't go back to Montana after that. I've avoided lakes entirely. Yet the compulsion lingers. At night, I sometimes dream of the lake. The black surface rises to meet me, slow and deliberate, its awareness pressing against mine. I can almost hear the faint whispering of water over stone, the vibration in the air that I once mistook for wind. I wake trembling, drenched in sweat, convinced that the pull is still reaching for me across miles, across years. I've tried to warn people, scientists, friends, colleagues, anyone who works in isolation in the backcountry. Some laugh it off, some worry about my mental state. But those who have worked alone in remote wilderness areas understand the subtle terror of the unknown. They know the weight of isolation, the oppressive stillness of a place untouched by humans. And I've learned to read the signs now. Ripples in impossible directions, shadows that move against light, a silence so deep it hums in your chest. I've never returned to the bitter roots. The lake, the forest, the fog all remain a part of me, stitched into my memory and my body. I sometimes wonder if the lake is waiting for me to forget, to let my awareness lapse, or if it has claimed a piece of me that will never leave its depths. I have seen reflections that aren't my own, heard voices that are eerily familiar yet not human, felt the pull of awareness where nothing should exist. And I understand now that the lake does not need me present to observe. It remembers. It waits. Occasionally, when the wind is still and the world is quiet, I feel that tug again, faint but insistent, a reminder of the patience beneath black water, beneath fog and shadow. I do not know what it wants, perhaps nothing at all, perhaps only acknowledgement, and that is enough to haunt a person for a lifetime. I have returned to the world, but a part of me remains there, at the edge of that silent black lake. And sometimes in the dead of night, when the world feels impossibly still, I swear I hear it, faint ripples, soft as breath, a patient pulse that reminds me I am not alone, and I have never truly left. The first drum hit the night like a second heartbeat that didn't belong to me. We had pulled into the forest late, later than I like. Nose of the RV pointed toward the road on purpose, wheels chalked, emergency brakes set with that satisfying ratchet of certainty. My name is Daniel, 36, born nowhere near these pines. Lila, 34. Arkansas born and local enough to read the sky by the shade of dusk, sat cross-legged at the dinette, tracing the campground grid on a paper map. We weren't at a fancy place. It was a primitive loop carved into the Ouachita Hills, dry sites tucked between Longleaf and Loblolly, a decommissioned fire road slanting off like a rumor. The air smelled clean with pitch and iron, like a tool that's been sharpened. When the sun sank, the wind changed and brought a hollow cool that moved through the needles like a whisper trying out different names. You learn to listen out here. If you camp long enough, you stop asking what was that and start measuring. Distance, direction, intent. A cracked twig within 10 feet tells you to pause, headlamp off. A barred owl 2 ridges over gives you the gift of calm. A far-off diesel is just somebody getting home. This first drum wasn't any of that. It didn't ask a question. It announced a schedule. One low, round thud, as if the night had just been stamped by a seal. Then, 40 heartbeats later, another. The sound didn't carry like a stereo, didn't pan from left to right. It felt centralized, as if the forest itself had a sternum and something on the other side of it was tapping to see who was there. "Kids?" Lila said without looking up. "Hazers? Somebody doing a prank?" "If this is a prank, it's patient," I said. I checked my phone out of habit. Midnight on the nose. I flipped airplane mode off and on, a long-ago EMT reflex that survives every career change. Checked at the tools, checked the exits, check yourself. The bars blinked and died. Wind picked up, slithered down the guy lines, and the drum hit again, a little fuller, like a palm on a big hollow tree. We'd heard stories, everyone does, of strange music in woods, of far-off engines with no road to roll on, even of voices that carry in a way that geometry can't explain. But stories make poor maps. They don't tell you where to aim your headlights or how to stand so your body makes the right kind of shadow. I stepped outside anyway. The cold bit like it wanted to be remembered. The fire we'd let burn down was black glass, and the stars had that dry brilliance that comes when the world is stingy with moisture. The drum came again while I was looking up at Orion's belt, and the sound didn't happen in the air so much as in the ground, like a bass that traveled through soil. We rationalize first because rationalization is a blanket, and blankets are what keep you alive until morning. Oil field equipment, I said to myself. A tank thumping, a pressure release. The nearest well sites were miles away, but miles are funny in timber. Sound can skitter and catch. Hunters, Lila offered when I climbed back in, or someone with a Bluetooth speaker who thinks midnight is a joke. She shrugged, calm, but I could see the way her hand had moved the map closer to her like a shield. The drum went quiet as if satisfied with our acknowledgement, and that was almost worse. Morning in that forest was forgiveness. Light came in vertical like a choir of thin gold spears. Birds didn't care about our private theater. They stitched the air with chatter, and for a moment I let myself believe in ordinary. We met 2 local tent campers at the trailhead. May, late 50s with a laugh that knocked dust off old stories, and her brother Earl, older, with the watchful eyes of a man who's had to read weather for a living. "Y'all hear the midnight drummer yet?" May grinned like she'd just found the punchline we already knew. Earl didn't smile. "Don't park over any roots," he said. "Not the big ones. You feel it more that way." "I thought it was a generator." I lied. Lying is confession in reverse. It was easier to toss out a false explanation than say the truth. It made me think of a hospital room where machines beeped and somebody's pulse had started to double count. I used to carry a trauma bag. I used to place hands where alarms were, and that gave me a posture I can't lose. When something thumps in a rhythm, I want to match it with breath or outrun it. But you can't outrun sound in timber. It gets in with the smallest crack. We hiked that day anyway, because fear grows best in unoccupied hands. The trail climbed a saddle between 2 low hills and then dropped past scrub oak into a small basin where a creek stitched itself into pools. Lila squatted by a slick rock and held her palm over the water, feeling temperature the way you test for fever. "This is colder than the creek should be," she said. "Something is feeding it." She let the sentence trail off and looked up the slope as if listening to what the land wasn't saying. The basin felt acoustically odd. Even our footfalls had a hesitation, a ghost echo that arrived slightly late, like a child repeating you from behind a door. You learn little tricks when you camp, how to orient the rig so your headlights point toward escape, how to set your shoes by the door, how to keep a second set of keys in your pocket even if you're just stepping outside for a minute. You learn to scan tree lines for straight lines that don't belong, posts, beams, old fences. You learn to ask locals questions that don't sound like questions. May gave us a lot without being asked. "Used to be somebody brought those drums out every Friday," she said, poking a stick at her camp stove flame like a conductor. "Now it's every night, come the cold months. Can't never tell if it's folks or not folks. That sounds older than we are and younger than last year, both. Earl just shook his head. Don't put your chairs on the ground after dark, he said. Put 'em on the rug. Any trouble? I asked. Not if you leave before it's polite to leave, May said, and I thought about how different cultures measure politeness, how one person's courtesy is another person's warning. The second night, we moved the RV 6 feet forward off a braid of exposed roots that curled up from the earth like knuckles. Lila mocked me for the measuring tape but helped anyway. Practice beats pride. I checked the batteries, confirmed the propane, leveled again, and I did the quiet things we do when we're stacking odds in our favor. Clipped a headlamp to the grab handle, set a thermos of hot water by the sink, put down the outdoor mat like a stage. The wind shifted at 11 and brought a resin-sweet smell, almost medicinal. It coated the back of my mouth the way panic can, a taste before the thought. At 12:07 by my analog watch, yes, a watch with hands, yes, I trust the honesty of gears, the drum arrived. 1. The RV didn't so much shake as hum. Cabinet latches gave tiny answers, polite clicks like teeth settling. 2. The air had weight, like the pressure drop before a storm. I stood barefoot on the vinyl and felt it underneath, that long wavelength that turns your bones into tuning forks. 3. I counted the interval without wanting to, as if there was a test I was studying for and the only score that mattered was survival. Lila sat up without speaking. Silence makes decisions faster than words do. This is where denial tries to pass as composure. If it's a party, they'll tire out, I told her, the same way you tell yourself a dog's not growling, it's just clearing its throat. I cracked the window. The night beyond was velvet, and the forest's texture felt wrong. The usual layers of chirp and rustle and far water hiss were flattened, pressed under a palm. 4. The sound had shape now, not just low but hollow, as if made by something that wanted echo, that longed for a response. 5. This time the floor gave a buzz, a tiny tingle like a phone on vibrate left on the counter. The dinette spoon rattled in its mug. Don't, Lila said as I reached for the door, which meant she'd read my body before I had. But I'm wired to check. The downside of a certain kind of caretaker is that you keep walking toward the thing that scares you because on the day it turns out to be someone who needs help, you'll never forgive yourself for staying put. I opened the door anyway and stepped onto the mat. Cold bit my ankles. The air was so still I could hear my own blood. 6. The world pressed down. The mat's rubber fibers trembled under my feet, as if sound had learned how to be a touch. I swept the beam low, a medic's habit, because you read more from the ground than from the sky. Pine roots laced the soil like veins, and I saw a strange quiver, needles shivering without wind. Not a lot. Enough. The beam climbed to the nearest trunk. Resin beads shone like tiny stars frozen in bark. The base of the drum thrummed again, and each bead made a micro-tremor, a glistened shiver, as if the tree had become a drumhead and the forests a single instrument. I clicked the light off, and the dark was kinder for a second, then worse. 7. Here's a lesson I wish I didn't learn at midnight. When the ground agrees with a sound that shouldn't be there, the first thing to do is lower your center of gravity and breathe. Fear lives in your chest, but balance lives in your legs. I bent my knees. I made my stance wide. I pictured a steady exit, not a run. Panic is just a bad plan that got approved. 8. The RV behind me creaked as if it wanted to lift, the way a boat wants to rise on a swell. I put my palm against the skin of the rig and felt it, a purr from below that wasn't mechanical. It didn't travel from a direction. It surfaced from underneath like a thought you can't place. 9. The sound seemed closer, not in distance, but in ownership, as if something had decided we were in its circle now. And circles aren't roads. You don't get out by walking forward. I swallowed and tasted the forest medicine again, pine and iron and the metallic aftertaste of a penny on the tongue. Lila's voice came soft through the doorway, not afraid yet, but braced. Tell me what you see. Nothing, I said, and for once the word was true in the worst way, the kind of nothing that watches you from everywhere. 10. There was a new note under the drum now, a faint knocking between beats, like fingertips on the underside of a table you're not supposed to touch. It took me a breath to realize where it was. Our floor. The sound wasn't just in the earth. It was traveling up through the pad, through the tires, through the frame, finding us by the map of our weight. And that was when the cabinet above the sink, the one we kept coffee in, gave a small, polite rattle from the inside, as if something in there had also started to keep time. The spoon rattled again, just once, like punctuation on the silence, and I knew the forest wasn't outside anymore. It had found a way in. Lila slid down from the bunk and pressed her bare feet to the floor. Her eyes widened. "You feel that?" she whispered. I nodded. The hum wasn't in the air. It was traveling straight through the soles of our feet like the rhythm of a train, except we weren't moving. Every beat landed heavier than the last. 11. I crossed to the kitchenette, opened the cabinet. Coffee, filters, the enamel mug we bought in Colorado, all still there. But they were trembling, faintly, in perfect time. The thudding below us was syncing with our things, and that's when the fear turned from sound into certainty. Something knew we were here. I put my hand flat on the counter. The laminate pulsed, almost imperceptibly, but not random. Each beat was measured, steady, chosen. "Daniel." Lila's voice quivered in the dark. She wasn't asking me for an answer. She was asking me to admit there wasn't one. 12. The RV gave a sigh, a subtle shift like the ground itself had exhaled. The drums paused, long enough for the silence to stretch until it felt unbearable. Then, from the forest, 3 sharp taps like knuckles on wood answered back, closer now. The door was still open. I don't even remember leaving it that way, but cold air had filled the cabin, heavier than it should have been. I stepped toward it, and the mat outside was vibrating, tiny shivers running through the rubber weave as though a heartbeat from beneath was rising to meet mine. I froze. I didn't shine the light this time. Instinct said, if you give them your light, they'll know your shape. Another drum beat, so close it shook the spice rack. Lila clutched my arm. "They're under us," she breathed. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't speaking in metaphor. Because the next vibration didn't come from the earth. It came from directly below, hollow, deliberate, like a palm striking the belly of a drum, and the drumhead was our RV floor. And then, beneath that steady pounding, another sound rose, faint, almost human. A chant, or maybe just the forest imitating one, threading through the night air. Low, rhythmic syllables I couldn't place, circling us like a language that had waited centuries for someone foolish enough to listen. I wanted to run. But the forest was awake, and running meant giving it something to chase. So I stood in the doorway, feet buzzing with the beat, staring into the dark that seemed to lean closer with every pulse, and I realized midnight had only just begun. The chant rose and fell like wind through hollow logs, but it wasn't the wind. I knew wind. This was measured, intentional, syllables layered over the thrum of the drum, as if something deep in the woods was teaching the ground to breathe in time. Lila's grip on my arm tightened until my skin burned. Her face was pale in the dim cabin light, and I could see the pulse in her throat twitch with every beat. Then the RV shifted again, not forward or back, not side to side, but downward. The tires sank a fraction of an inch, a subtle settling like something beneath us was drawing us in. Dishes clinked. The silverware tray rattled. Lila stumbled, catching herself on the counter. "Do you feel that?" she whispered. "I feel it," I said, though the words sounded like lies even to me, because what I really felt wasn't motion, not even sound anymore. It was presence. Something beneath the RV, vast and patient, pressing against us with every beat. The drums stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. You don't realize how loud your own body is until the world outside goes utterly still. Every swallow, every shallow breath becomes betrayal. My ears strained, expecting another thud, another chant, but nothing came. For a long, suspended minute, it was just us and the silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. From directly under my feet, I staggered back, heart lurching. It was so precise, so polite, like knuckles on the underside of a table. 3 knocks, waiting for permission. Lila shook her head violently, whispering, "Don't answer it. Don't you dare." But how do you not answer when something beneath you is asking to be let in? That's the trap of sound. It demands recognition. I clenched my jaw, forcing stillness. The knocks came again, harder this time, syncing with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was which. And then the floor bulged. Just slightly, just enough that the linoleum rose under my bare toes before settling back, as if the ground itself had taken a breath. I grabbed the flashlight, but when I thumbed it on, the beam stuttered and died. The batteries were fresh. I'd checked them that morning. The dark pressed in heavier. Lila gasped, fumbling for her phone. Dead black screen. Her hands shook as she tried the power button again and again to no use. "Power's gone," I said, though saying it out loud only made the dread more real. The chant began again, louder now, voices from all sides. Not just one, but many, layered and overlapping in a rhythm that matched the drums we no longer heard but still felt. The RV swayed slightly, as if a crowd had gathered outside and was circling, pushing with unseen hands. "Daniel," Lila whispered, "I think they're walking around us." I pressed my face to the window, peering into the dark. At first I saw nothing, just trees standing like a silent jury. But then the shadows moved wrong, too steady, too synchronized, silhouettes weaving between trunks, carrying no light, leaving no sound of footsteps, only the chant, low and patient, drawing closer. The floor thrummed again, the cabinet rattled harder. Something was claiming the rhythm of our home, sinking it into theirs, and just as suddenly as it started, the voices stopped. The silence felt like a held breath, collective and waiting. Then a single enormous drumbeat slammed through the ground, so strong the RV lifted a fraction and dropped back onto its shocks. Plates clattered, mugs tipped, the glass in the cabinet rang like a bell. Lila screamed, clutching me, as the sound reverberated into our bones, and in the echo of that beat, from deep in the earth beneath us, something whispered my name. Not hers. Mine. The voice that spoke my name was not a voice in the way you expect a human sound to be. It wasn't pushed through lungs or shaped by lips. It came up through the ground, through the steel bones of the RV, through the hollows of my own chest cavity, so that for an instant I wasn't hearing it. I was resonating with it. My name wasn't called. It was struck. Lila jerked back like she'd been burned. "Daniel, don't answer," she hissed. Her nails dug into my wrist hard enough to leave crescents. I swallowed against the raw dryness in my throat. The word was still echoing, not fading but settling, like sediment sinking in water. Every beat of my heart seemed to push it deeper into me, and I couldn't tell if it was leaving me or embedding itself there. Then came the tapping again, deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. This time I knew it wasn't random. It was mimicking. Mocking the way Lila had grabbed me earlier, her frantic pulse against my wrist. It was copying us. The shadows beyond the glass thickened. I could see them now, faint outlines moving in slow arcs around the RV, not quite human in posture, too long in some places, too jointless in others. They carried no light, but every time they shifted between the trees, the darkness seemed to bend toward them, the way tall grass leans when something enormous passes unseen. "Back away from the window," I whispered. My voice cracked, but Lila obeyed, dragging herself toward the bed. I stood rooted, though, because some part of me knew that whatever this was, it had already marked me. Moving wouldn't change that. The ground tremored again, but softer this time, like a warning pulled back into patience. The cabinet above the sink burst open, spilling mugs across the floor. One shattered, and in the tiny pause afterward, the chant returned. Closer, so close it felt like breath on the nape of my neck. It wasn't in English, not even in syllables I recognized, but my mind tried to make sense of it anyway. Words almost formed, open, down, again. Each time I thought I grasped one, it slipped, leaving me more confused, more desperate. The RV lights flickered on without my touching the switch. Bright, blinding. For 1 second I wished for the dark again, because the light revealed the trees outside. And in that circle of pines, every trunk had something carved into it. Symbols, spirals, hands. They hadn't been there during the day, I was sure of it. Fresh, too, because sap glistened in the sudden glare. Lila screamed and pointed at the mat outside. It was rippling. The very rubber we stood on hours ago was shifting like fabric pulled by a current, rising and sinking as if something beneath it was trying to surface. And then the drum returned, louder than before, so loud the walls themselves throbbed with it. Every strike sent a vibration up through the soles of my feet into my ribcage, rattling me hollow. Dishes flew from shelves. The fire extinguisher in its mount quivered loose and crashed to the floor. I braced against the counter, clinging to anything that felt steady. My mind scrambled for reason. Seismic activity, underground water, some kind of prank gone extreme. But reason had fled. This wasn't geology. This wasn't mischief. This was ritual, because when the next beat landed, it wasn't just a drum, it was a call. And all around the RV, in perfect unison, the shadows answered. They stomped the ground in rhythm, their shapes blurring with the trees, their chant rising into something guttural, inhuman. Each impact rattled my teeth. I staggered back, vision swimming, as if the air itself was shaking loose from the world. Lila screamed, clutching at me, but her voice was swallowed whole by the roar, and then the floor gave way. Not fully, not yet, but enough that the center sagged beneath my feet like something below had curled its hand upward, pressing against us from the other side. The linoleum bowed under my weight, a slow, impossible sag, like the skin of a drum being pushed from underneath. I staggered backward, every instinct screaming that the ground wasn't supposed to move like that. But it did, breathing, flexing, as if something with lungs larger than our entire RV had chosen this moment to inhale. Lila cried out, scrambling onto the bunk to get her feet off the floor. Her voice cracked, raw with terror. "Daniel, it's gonna come through." The chant outside swelled. It wasn't random anymore. It had cadence, purpose, like a hymn to something older than language. The shadow figures leaned in closer to the RV, their shapes pressing the air flat around the windows. I couldn't see faces, only impressions, like silhouettes painted over the forest. Each time the drum struck, they bowed slightly, like participants in some midnight liturgy. The cabinet doors slammed open one after another, bang, 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 in rhythm. A drawer shot out, scattering utensils across the sagging floor. The spoons and knives slid inward toward the center, pulled by the subtle dip, as though the RV had become a funnel and gravity had chosen a new direction. And then, in the lull between two drum beats, the voice rose again from beneath the floor. My name, drawn out this time, stretched into something unrecognizable. Danielle! It wasn't just sound. My chest vibrated with it, my skull resonated, my very breath felt hijacked. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but that did nothing. The name was inside me. "Stop listening!" Lila screamed. Her voice came from far away, muffled by the roar of that impossible chant. She hurled something heavy, a lantern maybe, onto the floor beside me, as if trying to break the rhythm. It clattered across the vinyl, spinning before it rolled to a stop. The drum beat ceased. The silence was like a vacuum, sucking the warmth out of the air. My ears rang with the absence. Every shadow outside froze. And then, tapping, slow, mocking, just beneath my knees. 3 knocks. I bolted upright, dragging Lila down from the bunk. "Shoes! Now!" My voice sounded like someone else's, clipped, mechanical. She obeyed, fumbling her sneakers on with trembling hands. I grabbed the keys, thank God I'd left them on the counter. Habit saves you when reason doesn't. The mat outside rippled violently now, bulging upwards as if something was seconds away from breaching through. "Don't step there," Lila gasped, clutching my arm. "It's waiting." But the only other way out was the driver's side door, and the shadows were clustered there, pressed too close, their forms smeared against the glass. I could feel their attention, cold, unblinking, like standing in a spotlight of nothing but eyes. I shoved Lila toward the back. "Bedroom window. Go." We scrambled over the mattress, yanked the window latch. It squealed open, resistance heavy, as if the frame itself didn't want to release us. Cold night air blasted in. I shoved her through first, hands under her hips until she tumbled onto the damp pine needles outside. The floor buckled hard behind me, cracking with a groan like wood under pressure. I didn't dare look back. I hauled myself through the window headfirst, landing badly, breath knocked out of me. The earth beneath my palms was trembling, not like an earthquake, but like the reverberation of something alive, something drumming from within. Lila grabbed my hand, dragging me to my feet. We stumbled into the dark, away from the RV, away from the circle of carved trees. Behind us, the chanting stopped again, and in the silence that followed, the RV groaned, metal straining, wood splintering, like it had been claimed. We ran crooked through the understory, hands out, shoulders glancing off trunks, our breath breaking apart into white strips that tore themselves on branches. It wasn't a run built for distance. It was an animal scramble, the kind you make when your body forgets posture and remembers survival. Pine needles slicked under my shoes like ball bearings. The ground didn't behave like ground. It shivered with a low pulse that tried to teach my feet the wrong rhythm. Every time my stride began to settle, a faint tremor rose and tried to make me land on the beat. I knew without knowing how that, if I ever matched it perfectly, if my footfalls became part of that drum, something would open. Off the path, Lila panted, yanking me sideways. The decommissioned fire road looked like escape, wide and straight, but it was also the most obvious line for anything that wanted to hurt us. We cut into bracken and knee-high switchgrass, ducked under a deadfall where gray bark peeled like sunburned skin. The forest thinned for a breath, then crowded close again, trunks standing shoulder to shoulder like the world had decided it didn't want lanes anymore. Behind us, the RV groaned, a deep, splintering sorrow. I made the mistake of turning my head. The windows glowed strangely, not with electricity, but with a dull internal shine, as if the cabinets, the table, the walls themselves were lit by friction, by pressure. The roof flexed once, a whale's back rolling in slow water, then settled. The drum from the earth didn't need to be loud now. It could whisper and still be everywhere. Toward voices, I said, but my voice was wrong, too small, too young. The sound I'd made when my mother's ankle snapped on a winter sidewalk and I'd learned that adults fall too. The chant had stopped, yet my brain kept supplying it, like a song stuck in the mind's rotted ceiling. Silence had become an instrument. We angled downhill because panic thinks down is safe. I had enough sense left to leave boot prints that were not clear, to scuff, to backstep once, to not hand the forest a neat map of us. Lila held the front of my jacket so we didn't separate in those tight seconds where you slip between two trunks and come out in a parallel world 6 feet to the left. A pale glow blinked between trees ahead. Tiny, staccato, not the steady shame of our rig. I hauled us toward it. May? I hissed, too loud. Earl? No answer. Then the brief cough of a propane stove and a low whistle like someone trying to teach a flame manners. We burst through a fringe of young pine and into their campsite. Their tent sat low and old school, canvas tanned by decades. A lantern hung hooded and cautious under a branch. Earl was already standing, boots on, jacket zipped, brim of his hat pulled low as if to keep thoughts in. "You waited too long," he said, not unkind. He jerked his chin toward the tent. In. "We can't hide," I started, but he sliced a hand through the air. In. There's a tone some men carry when they've watched storms land on roofs. It's not authority, it's a tired knowing. It put me back in an ambulance where an old chief would say move, and we would, because debate is a luxury. Inside, the smell of wool and cedar, of old smoke and clean tools. May crouched on a pad, hair unbound, eyes bright with a terrible gentleness. She took Lila's cold hand and sandwiched it between her palms. "You step on their talk," she said softly. "You don't let it into your chest. Can you do that? Can you talk without giving them your breath?" "What are they?" Lila whispered. The tent muffled the forest the way a hand over the mouth muffles a scream. We could still feel the ground's subtle throb, the shy push of something testing us from below. May's mouth went thin. "Depends who you ask." "Old ones? People who went down where folks shouldn't and learned to call up?" Sound that learned to carry names? She shrugged, a hard movement with soft shoulders. Something uses the hollow under this ridge. Been here since before any of our kin were. Earl eased the tent zipper 2 inches and peered out. They'll check, he said. They like to see who's awake. Your mistake was letting the sound teach your floor. I looked at my hands, at the dirt ground into the lines, at the way they trembled, not with fear alone, but with the need to act. What do we do? I asked, and hate pricked me, the part of my pride that didn't want to be the man who didn't already know. Old failures live in the seams. I had one, the call where the roof caved, and we got everyone but a boy his mother called Bug. I still wake with plaster dust on my tongue that isn't there. I have loved competence like a shield ever since. But the forest doesn't care about your certainties. Break the meter, Earl said simply. They hunt by rhythm. They teach your stuff to keep time first. The plates, the spoons, the frame. When you move with it, they know where to knock. You got to get messy, offbeat. You got any strings? Marbles? Loose chain? Utensils, I said, thinking of our knives and spoons sliding to the RV's center like offerings. A roll of quarters, bear bells. Good. Mackie pointed at a metal baking sheet beside a crate of supplies. You want everything to sound like it can't agree. He picked up a handful of hex nuts and dropped them into a tin cup. The noise they made when he shook it was offensive in the best way, a grudging argument between weight and tin. He showed us the rest like a ritual but practical, a length of chain draped over a cardboard tube, a plastic bag half full of pebbles he gently crushed and released to make a soft, unpredictable hiss, a harmonica he played not with melody but with short, ugly breaths. I don't let them teach my place, he said. I teach mine to be stubborn. If it holds too tight to one rhythm, something else gets to write its name in there. May nodded toward my chest. Same goes for your heart, she added. They tried you by name. Don't let them set your pace. Breathe wrong on purpose. Stutter it. Make it ugly. Lila looked at me, fear under her bravery. He can do that, she said. He holds his breath when he's thinking. Not now, May said. You don't hold. You scramble. The ground's low pressure swelled, a tide coming back. Outside, something slid against the tent skin with a sound like a winter branch dragging a window. Earl's hand went up, calm as a teacher's. They're curious when you're not on wood. You're less tasty in dirt. Still, don't give them anything. Something tapped the tent pole. 3 polite knocks, like it knew what doors were. The fabric bowed. The lantern's hooded lights sketched a long, negative shape that wasn't man or deer or anything I could give a name to without lying to myself. May inhaled and hummed a flat note that started high and sagged in ugly steps, then hiccuped and started again. It made my teeth itch. Lila picked up the tin of nuts and shook it out of time with May. I set my hands on my own ribs and forced breath that didn't make sense. Short, long, short, short, long, like a broken waltz played on bellows. The knock became a press. The tent fabric dimpled inward where the presence leaned. My empty hand wanted to push back. Earl caught my wrist with 2 fingers, barely a touch. Don't answer doors you didn't build, he said, and I realized what a door is in the woods. Anything hollow enough to return your knock. Floors, trunks, cabinets, bones. I pictured the RV floor bulging like a lung and nausea climbed like a slow elevator. The boy I'd lost rose with it. The sound of his mother's breath when we failed tried to hijack mine now. I made it stumble. 2 quick inhales, 1 slow exhale, stop, 3 quicks, 2 slows. Anything not to become an instrument someone else could play. The press on the tent eased. The shape slid away with displeasure like sand taking its time leaving a shoe. Something far to the left, maybe 2 campsites over, gave a sudden buckle and crash, a cooler flipping, then another sound that was hard to sanitize, a brief, wet bark cut short. Don't listen, May said quickly, hand on Lila's, and for once she meant it literally. Don't make it a picture in your head. They like when you open the door for them that way. We sat in our wrong music. It felt ridiculous and holy. The ground answered with tries, with polite insistence that kept failing to find the exact shape of us. Every few minutes, I felt a ghost touch at the edge of my foot or the back of my calf, like a draft with fingers. Each time I wanted to kick. Each time I did not. Time took on the texture of burlap. When the first thin silver hint of dawn leaked under the tent fly, grief hit me so hard my eyes stung. It wasn't just relief. It was the night unhooking from my spine. "They don't like morning," Earl said. "Too much new noise. Birds are their enemies, frogs are their choir, but birds will not be taught." We stepped out into a forest that looked brand new and exactly the same. My first breath of day tasted like metal and sap, and thank you. Frost-rimed leaves. Our RV sat where we'd left it, only wrong. Mud bulged up around the tires like a hand refusing to let go. One corner had sunk so deep the steps kissed the ground. The window glass was cold and dark, but the carved trees still wore their bright, wet sap like buttons. Lila's mouth folded in on itself. "Our home," she said, and in those two syllables was a year of maps and repairs and laughter and fights and the idea of us on the move like a single muscle. "We'll get it out," I said automatically, then stopped, tasting the lie. Earl squinted at the ruts and said nothing. May looped an arm around Lila and made a small sound in her throat that wasn't quite a shush. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet, but light was touching the tops of the pines, washing them from slate to green. "Help me pack what we can carry," I said finally, because sometimes the next honest thing is just hands moving. We moved like a team that had worked the same fire line before. May kept watch. Earl stood where vibrations felt truest, like a dowser reading not water but trouble, and Lila and I slid through the window again to bypass the waiting mat. The floor was solid in daylight, firm as a new oath. It was also plainly warped where it had bowed, a subtle basin in our linoleum that my foot wanted to avoid as if it remembered teeth there. We took only what felt like us if we had to be feathers, documents, photos, the enamel mug that had rang like a bell when fear got loud and somehow felt like a talisman now, our headlamps, a short roll of tools. I reached for the analog watch I always hung near the door and found it stopped at 12:17. I didn't wind it. I put it in my pocket like you pocket a warning you haven't translated yet. Outside, birdsong came in like a legal statute, layered and indisputable. The forest's undernote relaxed, slightly, not a surrender, but a pause from the argument. Earl tilted his head. "You can try to pull her," he said, meaning the RV, "but you'll need more than will. Bring a winch, bring friends who won't listen at night. Come back after a rain when the ground made up its mind another way." "Should we leave?" Lila asked, and the question was too big for roadside advice. She meant not just the campsite, but the region, the life, the way we point our days, toward unknown places or toward quiet repetitions of safety. My mouth opened and closed. I thought of my old chief again, of the boy called Bug, of the way I'd lived any moment since with one foot in the door of the next emergency, because maybe if I got there fast enough, I could time travel to the one I missed. "You leave tonight," May said gently. "You don't stay in the same hollow 2 midnights running. You want to learn from it? You do it somewhere else first, somewhere it don't know your name yet." Lila nodded like a tree in light wind. "We go," she said, and the way she said it braided resolve with grief with a thread of anger I recognized as healthy. The anger wasn't at the forest. It was at the part of herself that had wanted to explain away the first drum. We shouldered our packs. I took a last look at the rig, this awkward, big-hearted beast that had carried our bed and our coffee and our petty arguments across counties that didn't care about us, and I put a palm on the side. The metal was cold, alive with nothing but mourning. "We'll come back for you," I said, then corrected myself. "We'll come back with a plan." We started up the old fire road because in daylight, straight lines are her friends again. 2 turns up, I looked back. The clearing had the same size but different mood, like a room after an argument. The carved trees kept their new scars. Sap glinted. I felt a private pull to go back and lay my hand on each wound, to apologize to things that couldn't know what that meant, to sand the spirals clean with my breath. I didn't. You don't add your apology to a place that speaks in beats. As we climbed, Lila touched my elbow. "What did it say?" she asked quietly. "You heard it," I said, deflecting. A leaf-littered track felt almost cheerful under our boots. Far off, a woodpecker mocked us with natural percussion. "It said your name," she said. "It didn't say mine." I waited until we'd reached a bend where a new light fell across our faces like permission. "It said my name like a drum," I admitted. "It struck me with it." "What does that mean?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, and my honesty felt like rinsed metal. "But I know this. Next time I hear anything teaching me a rhythm I didn't ask for, I don't let it in my bones. I don't make my house keep its time for it. I don't give it the satisfaction of my name echoing its cadence back." At the ridge, the world opened. A road cut through scrub and low oak, far enough away to be a rumor, but close enough to be faith. We stood in new sun, watched our breath stop showing, listened to normal day noises assemble into a choir like nothing bad had ever rehearsed here. It would be easy to call ourselves lucky and leave it at that. Easy to write it off as a story we could tell to get listens, to say, "We made it out," and not talk about what it tried to make us into. But the drum had reached up through my body and made me a hollow for one beat. That isn't something you say who to and move on. You either learn to fill your own hollows with music that's yours, or something else will take the seat. We started walking toward the road. I made my breath wrong on purpose, just once more, and felt something in my chest loosen, like an old knot given a pass. We would come back, not as a dare, not to conquer, but to finish a conversation on terms that wouldn't swallow us. And when we did, we would bring ugly music and friends and day. We would also bring a question I didn't know how to ask yet. What debt does a place collect when it learns your name? We hit the road by mid-morning, boots crunching gravel, the forest trailing us with its shadow but no longer pressing close. Every step further from that hollow loosened something in my spine. Yet distance does strange things. While the ground stopped vibrating, the echo of that drum still pulsed in me, like memory had learned how to keep time. A pickup slowed when it saw us. The driver, a man with the leathery skin of someone who'd worked decades under southern sun, leaned across to roll down the passenger window. "Y'all break down?" he asked. His voice was casual, friendly, but my chest tightened anyway. For a moment, I half expected him to speak in rhythm, syllables falling like beats. "Our rig's stuck," I said. My voice sounded thin, almost childlike. "We'll need a tow." He studied us, eyes narrowing slightly. "Which site?" I hesitated. The truth was dangerous, but lies felt worse. "Old Loop, past the decommissioned road." Something in his jaw twitched. He nodded slowly, like he was confirming a rumor he'd never wanted confirmed. "Don't stay another night." "We're not," Lila said quickly. Her hand gripped my wrist so hard my knuckles tingled. The man offered us a ride. We climbed into the bed of the truck, wine slapping our faces as the forest slid past. I looked back once. From this distance, the trees were just trees again, green and honest in the light. The clearing was invisible, swallowed by the landscape like nothing unusual had ever lived there. But I knew better. That night, we stayed at a small roadside RV park, the kind with gravel lots and a Coke machine humming beside the office. We rented a cabin instead of hooking up. Neither of us wanted to sleep in anything on wheels. Inside, the silence was normal. The fridge hummed, the air conditioner clicked, pipes ticked when hot water ran. Ordinary noises, messy and offbeat, exactly the kind Earl had said to trust. We lay on the narrow bed, still wearing our clothes. Lila stared at the ceiling fan blades. "I keep thinking," she whispered, "what if they follow us? What if knowing your name means they don't need the ground anymore?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because I had been asking myself the same thing since we left. Sometime after midnight, I woke to silence. Not the heavy silence of that forest, but the ordinary kind. Air conditioner off, fridge between cycles, fans slowing to a stop. I held my breath, no drums, no chants, nothing pressing through the floor, just my heart thudding too fast. But when I sat up, I saw it, on the nightstand, my analog watch. It had stopped again, not at midnight this time, but at 12:17, the exact same minute as before. I closed my eyes and forced my breath into a broken rhythm, short, long, short, short, long, until my pulse steadied. Maybe that was all I could do. Maybe that was the lesson. Never let them teach me the beat. Morning came, and the watch ticked normally again, as though nothing had happened. We never went back for the RV. Some places don't give you back what you left. Some debts you pay by walking away, but I still feel it sometimes, usually late at night when the house is too quiet. The air will go heavy, the silence will stretch, and I'll remember that floor bowing like a lung under my feet. And I'll break my own rhythm, tap a pen, shuffle my breath, hum a tune off key, just enough to remind the dark, I'm not your drum, not yet. Echoes of the abandoned tunnel. I've worked the rails most of my life. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. Long nights, heavy tools, the constant hum of steel and wood under tension. For years, I thought the strangest thing I'd ever encounter would be a blown-out tie or a dead deer sprawled across the tracks. That was before the tunnel. It sits hidden in a forgotten section of rail in Pennsylvania, near a place where the map folds up on itself and the tracks simply end. The company calls it a decommissioned section, though in the yard we all called it the Hollow Mile, a stretch of track that was laid a century ago, then abandoned when the railroads modernized and rerouted. They said it wasn't worth the cost to tear it up, so it stayed there, rusting into the weeds, a scar across the woods. Most guys never saw it. Why would they? It doesn't connect to any active line. But I was put on a crew sent to inspect the area, check for erosion, and document anything the company might need for legal purposes. Old land rights, drainage issues, that kind of thing. It was the kind of job they gave to men who didn't complain about long drives and who didn't mind sleeping rough. So I took my old camper, parked it on a turnout near the line, and set up for a week of work. Just me, my tools, my logbook, and the endless woods. The first night was unremarkable. It always is. I made a small fire by the camper, listened to the crickets and the low, distant groan of the forest. You learn to tell the difference between normal sounds and trouble. A branch cracking under a deer's weight sounds different than one stepped on by a man. The forest breathes differently when someone else is in it. That night, everything sounded alive, but ordinary. It was the second night when I heard the train. Now, understand something. There shouldn't have been a train. The nearest active line was miles away, and I knew its schedule by heart. Even if by some mistake a locomotive had made its way down this dead spur, it would have been impossible. The rails here were buckled, twisted in places where the earth had shifted. No train could ride that line without tearing itself apart. But still, I heard it. It started faint, like the memory of a sound more than the sound itself. A low steel moan, the rhythmic clatter of wheels over ties. I froze by the camper, straining my ears. The fire hissed low, and behind me, the woods pressed in close, black, and endless. Then the horn. It was distant but undeniable, a long blast that shivered through the trees, followed by another, not the echo of a highway truck, not the groan of shifting earth. A train horn. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the track bed. My boots crunched on gravel that hadn't felt a real wheel in decades. The sound was louder now, steel grinding steel, the kind of shriek that sets your teeth on edge. I swung my light down the rails, and for a moment I swore I saw the faint reflection of something metallic deep in the tunnel's mouth. Then the sound cut off, just gone. No echo, no fading. Silence so thick it rang in my ears. I stood there longer than I cared to admit, light trembling in my hand until the fire behind me snapped and pulled me back. I told myself it was imagination, maybe some kind of acoustic trick. Old tunnels can carry sound from miles away, bouncing it strange ways. That's all it was. I almost believed it. The third night proved me wrong. I'd spent the day hiking the line, photographing damage, making notes about erosion. The tunnel itself was impressive up close, arched stonework, blackened with age, water dripping from seams like the tunnel itself was sweating. The air around it was always colder, like stepping into a cellar, even when the sun was high. That night, I sat in the camper with the lantern low, scribbling in my logbook. The woods outside had gone oddly quiet, not the natural hush of dusk, but a hollow silence. Then I felt it before I heard it, a faint vibration, running up through the ground, into my boots, into the frame of the camper. A train, coming again. I slid the lantern off, my breath shallow, and then it came. The horn, clearer this time, closer. I swear I could almost feel the wind of it rushing past, though nothing moved. I opened the camper door and stepped outside. That's when I heard the voices. They weren't shouts, not at first. More like murmurs, overlapping whispers carried on air. I stepped closer to the track, and the whispers rose. Pleading tones, desperate, muffled like passengers pressing their mouths against glass. "Let us off. Please, someone open." The words tangled, indistinct but urgent. My light shook as I swung it toward the tunnel. For the briefest second, I saw movement, dark shapes pressing against darker shadows, like figures crowding behind a fogged window. Then the horn blared again, deafening, and everything vanished. Silence returned, as if it had swallowed itself whole. The fire I'd built earlier was out, though I hadn't touched it. The woods smelled wrong, metallic, like wet iron. That night, I didn't sleep. By morning, I was half convinced I'd gone stir-crazy. Too many nights alone in the woods can do that. But the logbook in my lap, the notes I'd scrawled in the dark with a shaking hand, they were real. My handwriting, my words, voices from tunnel, train impossible, shapes in dark. I should have packed up, driven out, called the job done, but something in me wouldn't let go. I told myself it was pride or stubbornness or the need to prove I wasn't losing my mind. But the truth was darker. I wanted to hear it again. So I stayed. The fourth night, I made a mistake. I sat closer to the tunnel, a thermos of coffee in hand, my recorder on the ground beside me. I wanted proof. I wanted to capture the sound, something I could bring back and play for the guys in the yard, shove in the face of anyone who doubted. The air chilled as dusk fell. My breath fogged. The woods hushed. And then the vibration, faint at first, then stronger. I hit record and waited. The train came. I could hear the clatter of wheels, the groan of couplings, the steady rush of speed, louder and louder until I swore the ground itself shifted. The horn shattered the night, and then came the voices again, clearer this time, overlapping cries. "Please, stop. Open the doors. God, help us. Get us out." My skin crawled. I aimed the recorder toward the tunnel, my heart hammering. And then from the darkness, something new. A single voice, calm, deliberate, cutting through the chaos. "Why are you here?" I froze. The voices weren't supposed to notice me. They weren't supposed to speak to me. My mouth went dry, my flashlight beam trembling over wet stone. Again, the voice, low, certain, closer than before. "Why are you here?" I stumbled back, nearly dropping the recorder. The horn screamed again, so loud it felt like it split my skull, and then everything stopped. No train, no voices, just silence. But when I looked down at the recorder, the little red light was still blinking. It had captured everything I should have left right then, but I didn't. The morning after that recording, I didn't move from the camper for hours. I just sat there with the recorder on the table, staring at it like it was some kind of cursed object. My hands shook when I finally rewound and pressed play. The faint hiss of static came first, then the vibration. Low, steady, undeniable. My own breath in the background, fast and uneven. Then, clear as daylight, the horn, and then the voices. I turned the volume all the way up, listening to the rush of sound, the words layered and desperate. My skin prickled as I realized I could make out more of them now, as if the machine had picked up what my ears couldn't. Fire, can't breathe. Doors locked, no way out. God, it's so hot. The words carried terror, not just noise. Panic, and then the voice, the one that had spoken to me. "Why are you here?" It was clear, calm. It didn't echo like the others. It was direct, present, as if someone had leaned right over my shoulder and whispered into the microphone. I stopped the recording and shut it off. The silence afterward was worse than the playback. The company didn't pay me to chase ghosts. They paid me to write up erosion reports and check culverts. But there was no way I could leave. I told myself I needed to understand it, that I couldn't walk away from something this strange without seeing it through. But deep down, I think I knew the truth. Something about that voice, it had hooked into me. I spent the day walking the line again. The tunnel loomed at the far end, its stone mouth wet and slick, shadows swallowing the inside. I forced myself closer, running my hand over the cool granite blocks. My boots scuffed the gravel at the entrance, and a wave of cold air drifted out like a breath. Inside, the dark was total. The beam of my flashlight barely seemed to cut through it, as if the air itself was thicker there. Water dripped somewhere deep within, echoing like footsteps. I took 3 careful steps in before I stopped. The smell was wrong. Metallic, sharp, like rust mixed with something chemical, something acrid. My throat tightened as if the air itself was pressing against me. I backed out quick, the hair on my neck stiff. That night, I couldn't sleep. The camper felt smaller than it ever had. The walls too close, the windows too dark. Every sound of the forest made me twitch. I thought I heard voices outside, low, muttering, though when I pressed my ear to the glass, there was only the faint rustle of leaves. Around midnight, the vibration started again. The ground trembling faintly, the air pressing close. I sat rigid on the camper's bed, recorder in hand, though I didn't hit record this time. My heart pounded as the horn bellowed, closer than ever, rattling the frame of the camper. Then, footsteps. Not the clatter of wheels, not whispers. Footsteps, gravel crunching outside, steady, deliberate. I stood frozen, staring at the camper door, half expecting the handle to turn. My breath fogged in the lantern light, though it wasn't cold outside. The air in the camper had dropped like someone had opened a freezer. The footsteps circled once, then stopped. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the camper's thin metal door. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My body refused to move. My ears roared with blood as silence followed, pressing down heavy. I waited, heart hammering for what felt like hours. Nothing. When I finally gathered the courage to throw open the door, the clearing was empty. The fire ring sat cold, the trees swayed softly in the night breeze, and the tunnel yawned black at the far end of the line. But in the gravel just outside the door, I saw them. Footprints. Not boots, not shoes. Bare feet. Pressed deep into the stone chips, toes splayed, the outline of skin and heel sharp against the pale dust. They led from the direction of the tunnel, circled the camper, and vanished back the same way. I didn't sleep at all after that. By dawn, I was a wreck. My hands shook as I packed tools, my notebook, the recorder. I should have driven out, reported what I saw, demanded someone else finish the job. But as I turned the key in the camper's ignition, I caught sight of the tunnel again in the morning light. And I swear, for just an instant, I saw a face in the shadows. Not clearly, not enough to describe. Just the suggestion of features, pressed against the dark, like someone watching from behind a pane of glass. The engine died in my hands. I sat there for a long time, staring at the tunnel until I shut the key off altogether and stepped back out. Something in me refused to leave. The 5th night, I brought the recorder right to the tunnel entrance. I set it down on the gravel, my flashlight aimed into the black. My chest felt like it was caving in, but I stood my ground. The vibrations came. The horn blew, so loud it rattled the recorder against the rocks. The voices surged again, louder than ever, filling the air with their panic. I thought I could see shapes shifting inside, just beyond the reach of my light, hands pressed against the dark, faces turned toward me, mouths open. And then, once more, the voice. This time it wasn't calm. This time it was angry. You don't belong here. The words thundered inside my skull, though my ears rang with silence. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then snapped back on. The shadows shifted in the tunnel like a tide pulling forward. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stood rooted as the recorder clicked and hissed, the red light blinking furiously. The voices rose into a chaos of screams, wails, metal grinding, glass shattering, and then silence. Not gradual, not fading, just gone, like a switch thrown. I stumbled backward, gasping, and nearly tripped over the ties. The recorder lay still on the gravel, its red light dark. When I picked it up, it was hot to the touch. That night, I didn't return to the camper. I couldn't bring myself to sit in its thin walls, knowing whatever this was could walk the gravel outside. Instead, I built a fire close to the tunnel entrance, as if that circle of light could protect me. The woods around me stayed dead quiet, not even an owl breaking the silence. My fire popped and cracked, and every burst of sparks made me flinch. At some point in the night, my eyes grew heavy. Just for a moment, I let them close. And that's when I heard the whisper, right beside me. "I told you not to come back." My eyes flew open. The fire was low, just coals glowing red. The tunnel loomed silent, but the air around me was colder than ice. I swear on my life, I felt breath against my ear. I leapt up, stumbling, heart pounding, flashlight beam swinging wildly. Nothing, just my gear, my fire, my own ragged breathing. But the words still echoed in my skull, heavy and final. I didn't try to sleep again. By morning, I knew one thing with certainty. The tunnel wasn't abandoned, it was occupied, and I had trespassed too far. The decision to go inside the tunnel came with a heaviness I can't explain. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't even courage. It was compulsion, like something had already decided for me. I spent most of that 6th day pacing the gravel line, circling my camper, trying to talk myself out of it. I'd scribble something in my logbook, scratch it out, start again. I thought about packing up, but each time I turned toward the truck, I felt my chest tighten, like leaving wasn't an option anymore. By late afternoon, I was sitting on the track bed, staring at the tunnel's dark mouth, sweat soaking my shirt despite the chill that always hung in that spot. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Finally, I strapped on my headlamp, slung my tool belt across my waist, like a weight would make me braver, and walked forward. The first step in was like stepping off a cliff. The air changed instantly, pressing down cold and damp. My light cut a narrow path through the black, the stone walls slick with condensation. Every sound echoed longer than it should have, my boots ringing out as if the tunnel itself was hollow metal. I counted steps to keep steady. 10, 20, 30. The daylight behind me shrank into a pale disk, then a pinhole, then nothing but memory. The smell thickened the deeper I went. Not just rust and wet rock, but smoke. Acrid, like coal burned too hot, mixed with scorched metal. My throat tightened against it, and for a moment I thought I heard something hissing, faint beneath the drip of water. I aimed my light down at the ground and froze. There were rails here. I'd expected them to be twisted, rusted beyond recognition, but instead they looked sharp, polished, fresh, like steel that had been ridden just yesterday. My beam followed them forward into the dark, unbroken, gleaming faintly under the moisture. A sound echoed then, faint but unmistakable, the squeal of metal against metal. Far ahead. I should have turned back right there, but I kept walking. After what felt like 100 steps more, I noticed something along the walls, scratches, not random scrapes from rockfall or tools, but deliberate marks gouged into the stone. Long parallel lines, some deep, others shallow, like fingernails dragged down a chalkboard. My stomach churned as I ran my hand along them, the grooves sharp, edges flaking under my fingertips. Then came the whisper, not in my ear this time, but all around. "Don't stop, keep moving." I spun, light sweeping across the walls, empty, just wet stone and rails. Too late to go back. My headlamp flickered once, twice, and in the momentary dark, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, standing just at the edge of the light. Men, women, children, their forms blurred as if seen through heat ripples, faces twisted in agony, and then the light snapped back and they were gone. My knees nearly buckled, but I kept moving forward, half running now, boots clanging on steel. The tunnel curved gently, and with the bend came a glow ahead. At first I thought it was my lamp reflecting, but it grew brighter, flickering orange. Smoke thickened, the hiss turned into a roar, and then I saw it. A train, or the ghost of one. It stood still on the tracks, 50 yards ahead, black cars lined one after the other, windows glowing with fire inside. Figures pressed against the glass, pounding with fists, mouths open in silent screams. The heat of it washed over me, stinging my skin, though the air stayed cold as ice. The engine sat at the front, massive, its headlight a dead glass eye. And yet I heard it rumble, deep and alive, steam hissing from its joints. I should have run. Every instinct screamed to run, but I stepped closer, drawn like an insect to flame. That's when one of the windows shattered. A hand thrust out, blackened, charred, skin peeling like paper. Fingers clawed the air, reaching for me. The screams erupted then, not muffled anymore, but deafening, pouring from every car, overlapping, desperate. And over it all, that voice again. You shouldn't have come. It shook the stone, vibrated in my bones, made my teeth ache. I stumbled backward, covering my ears, but the sound only grew. The train groaned, steel grinding, and with a lurch it began to move. Wheels shrieked against polished rails, sparks flying, the cars dragging forward in a slow crawl. I turned and ran. The tunnel walls closed in, shadows leaping with each flicker of my dying lamp. The roar of the train chased me, closer, closer, the horn splitting the air behind me. My lungs burned, legs screaming as I sprinted toward the pale disk of daylight far ahead. The ground shook under me, rails humming, gravel spitting. I didn't dare look back. At last I burst into the open air, stumbling onto the gravel outside. I collapsed to my knees, chest heaving, sweat soaking through my shirt. The tunnel loomed silent behind me. Nothing but black stone, no glow, no sound. But the smell lingered, smoke, burned flesh, and when I looked down, my boots were scorched. The soles melted in places, edges blackened as if I'd walked through fire. I sat there until dusk, staring at that tunnel, waiting for something to emerge. But nothing came. The forest stayed silent, the sky turned violet, and I realized I couldn't tell anymore if I'd escaped or if I'd only crossed some invisible threshold I didn't understand. That night, back in the camper, I played the recorder one last time. The vibrations were there, the horn, the screams, clearer than ever, louder than ever. But at the very end, after the chaos, one last voice, my voice. Breathless, panicked, whispering into the static, I can't get out. But I hadn't said those words. Not yet. I didn't sleep after that. Not even a little. I sat in the camper with every light burning, the lanterns, the overheads, even the flashlight propped up on the counter. My logbook lay open in my lap, but my pen wouldn't move. All I could do was stare at the recorder sitting on the table, waiting for it to move, to light up, to speak again on its own. It never did. But the silence was worse. By dawn, I thought I'd convinced myself to leave. I threw everything into the truck bed, slammed shut the camper, and turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. I tried again. Same result. The gauges flickered wildly, the radio hissed static, and for a moment the horn of a train blared through the speakers. Loud, raw, close. I tore the key out, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. That's when I saw the condensation on the inside of the windshield. Not fog from my own breath, words. Dragged into the glass by a finger, smeared in the moisture. Stay. I backed out of the cab so fast I nearly tripped over the gravel. The woods pressed close around the clearing, trees leaning, branches scraping like they were listening. The tunnel loomed at the far end, unchanged, silent. But something in me broke then. Fear can only build for so long before it stops being fear and turns into surrender. I realized I wasn't leaving, not until whatever this was let me. So I did the only thing I could think of. I walked back to the tunnel. This time I didn't bring the recorder. No tools, no lamp, just my flashlight and the weight of a man who no longer believed he had control over anything. The mouth of the tunnel seemed wider than before, a black void swallowing daylight. I stepped inside, my boots crunching over gravel. The smell hit immediately. Burnt metal, scorched fabric, smoke that never cleared. I walked until daylight behind me faded to nothing, until my beam barely reached the walls. The silence grew heavy, pressing into my skull. Then came the vibration. Stronger than before, shaking the soles of my ruined boots. The horn wailed, so loud the walls trembled, dust falling from the stone arch above me. My light flickered, dimmed, and went out. I was blind in the dark. The train roared past me then, not around me, not before me, but through me. I felt it in my bones, a tidal wave of heat and steel. Screams pierced the black, bodies slamming against unseen glass, hands clawing at me though nothing touched. I staggered, choking on smoke that wasn't there, my lungs searing. And then, silence. Total, absolute silence. My flashlight snapped back to life, weak but steady. The tunnel was empty. Rails stretched ahead, gleaming. No train, no smoke. But I wasn't alone. Shapes lined the walls on either side. Not solid, not flesh, but impressions, people burned into the stone like shadows after a blast. Men in work clothes, women in dresses, children clutching suitcases. Their outlines blurred and wavered, but their faces were clear. They were all staring at me. My knees buckled. I stumbled backward, light jerking wildly. And then one of the shapes moved. It peeled itself from the wall, stepped forward, its eyes hollow pits glowing faint orange. Its mouth opened, and instead of a voice, a horn blared from deep within it. I ran. I don't remember how long, only that my legs carried me faster than I thought possible. Lungs tearing, chest ready to explode. The daylight ahead swelled, brighter, brighter, until I burst out of the tunnel mouth and collapsed into the gravel. When I rolled over to look, the tunnel was just stone and shadow again. Empty. But I knew what I'd seen. I didn't go back to the camper. I didn't try the truck again. I just walked. Straight into the woods. No trail, no compass. I walked until my legs gave out, until I collapsed against a tree trunk and blacked out. When I woke, the sun was high. My head throbbed, throat dried, tongue swollen. I had no idea how far I'd wandered, but the line and tunnel were gone. Just endless trees in every direction. And then I heard it. The horn. Distant at first, then closer, echoing through the forest as if the tracks had grown beneath the soil. Birds scattered from the canopy, branches shook. My heart plummeted. I staggered up, tripping over roots, running without direction. The horn blared again, closer now, rattling through my chest, and then impossibly, I saw it. Rails. Cutting clean through the forest, polished and gleaming, vanishing into the distance both ways. And standing on them, a figure. Barefoot, clothes tattered, skin blackened, its head tilted as it watched me, arms hanging loose at its sides. When it opened its mouth, smoke poured out. You can't leave. The words were flat, final. The horn roared again, and the ground shook as if a train was bearing down on me from behind. I turned, but the tracks stretched empty into the trees. Nothing there. When I looked back, the figure was gone. Just rails. Just forest. Just silence. I don't remember how I made it out. A hiker found me 2 days later, miles from any marked trail, dehydrated, delirious. He said I kept muttering the same thing over and over, "Don't go in the tunnel. Don't go in the tunnel." The company pulled me from the assignment after that. I told them the place was unsafe, that erosion had made the tunnel unstable. They wrote it off in their books, closed the section permanently. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when the wind dies down and the night goes still, I swear I still hear it. That horn. Far away, but moving closer. Always closer. It's been 12 years since I walked out of those woods. Skin blistered from the sun, lips cracked, half out of my mind. On paper, I recovered. I got steady work again, transferred out of the Pennsylvania yards and into less demanding assignments. I rebuilt my camper, got sober, even remarried. If you ask my coworkers, I'm just another tired railroad man, the kind who talks too much about rust and steel, about how the industry used to be. But the truth is, those days in the tunnel never left me. I don't talk about it, not to my wife, not to the men I work with, not even to myself in the mirror. But at night, when the house is quiet and the hum of the refrigerator is the only sound, I hear it. That horn. It comes faint, always faint. At first, I thought it was real. Maybe a freight line shifting schedules, maybe an echo through the hills. But then I started hearing it when no trains were running. 2 a.m, when every line within 50 miles was dead silent. A single blast stretched too long, trembling through the glass of my window. And worse, sometimes I hear the voices. Not screaming anymore. Whispering. Just outside the house like people waiting to be let in. My wife will stir in bed, shift her weight, but never wake. never here. I lie there rigid, every nerve sharp, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the knock that hasn't come yet. I still have the recorder. I kept it hidden in a box, buried under old tools and broken things. Sometimes I tell myself I should throw it away, burn it, smash it with a hammer, but every time I touch it, I freeze. The plastic feels warm, like it's alive. Once, after too much whiskey, I pressed play again. The horn blared, screams filled the room, and there was my voice, broken and breathless. I can't get out. Only this time, there was more. A whisper, almost lost in the static, right at the very end. A whisper I'd never heard before. We're waiting. That was 4 years ago. I haven't touched the recorder since, but the world has a way of dragging you back to the places you swore you'd never return. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from an old yard manager. The company had sent a survey team out near the Hollow Mile, not the tunnel itself, just the area around it. Liability checks, property disputes, normal things, except the team never came back. 4 men, 2 trucks, all gone. Search and rescue combed the woods, found tire tracks in the dirt leading toward the tunnel, found 1 truck door hanging open, headlights dead, keys still in the ignition, found a campfire circle near the tracks, stones still warm. That was all. The line's been sealed off now. Chain link fence, concrete barriers, government signs warning of unstable ground. Nobody talks about the missing men anymore. Their families got quiet settlements, the kind of money that comes with gag orders attached. But I know where they went, and I know what they saw. The part that eats at me, the part that keeps me awake, isn't the train or the voices or the faces in the stone. It's the feeling I had when I stumbled out of that tunnel into the daylight, collapsed on the gravel, and thought I was free. I wasn't. Because I can still feel it, even now. Rails humming under my feet when no tracks are there, smoke in my throat when the air is clean, the vibration in the floorboards at night. And every time I hear that horn, I swear it's closer. One of these nights, I think, it won't stop at the edge of the woods. One of these nights, I think it'll come right through my street, tearing through the houses, shaking glass from windows, dragging its burning cars behind it. And when it does, when it slows to a crawl outside my door, I know what I'll hear. The knock. 3 raps on the wood. And the voice, steady, certain, patient as ever, "Why are you here?" And this time, I won't have an answer. Because deep down, I think I never left that tunnel. Not really. I think none of us do. I told myself I'd never dig into the tunnel's history. Curiosity was what got me trapped there in the first place. But after the company hushed up those 4 missing men, I couldn't leave it alone anymore. So I started asking questions. Quiet ones. Old railroad hands don't like to talk, but after a few beers, stories leak out. One man remembered his grandfather calling it the fire tunnel. Another swore it was used during wartime, that a troop train derailed inside and burned alive, hundreds lost, the bodies never fully recovered. Some said it was a coal run that caught fire underground and suffocated everyone on board. Others claimed it was just superstition, a way to scare rookies away from wandering into dangerous old shafts. But the strangest thing was this. Every version ended the same way. The train never left. Nobody could tell me what that meant. They just said it like a phrase passed down without explanation. The train never left. I went further. Local archives, newspaper clippings, dusty records in libraries that smelled like mildew and ink. A few articles mentioned a derailment in that area back in the early 1900s. Dozens dead, but the details didn't line up. No exact date, no official casualty list. Almost like the story had been smudged over, half erased. Then I found something worse. A photo. Black and white, grainy, barely holding its shape after a century. It showed the tunnel's mouth, fresh stonework, a line of men in caps and overalls standing in front of it. But when I leaned close under the magnifier, my stomach turned. In the shadow of the arch, just barely visible, were faces. Not the workers. Pale, blurred faces pressed against the dark, mouths wide as if screaming. The library card said the photograph had been donated in the 70s by an estate sale from a retired rail engineer. The name scratched onto the back was familiar. too familiar. It was the same name I'd heard whispered in my recorder, the one that had asked me why I was there. I left the library shaking. I drove home on autopilot, hands clamped white on the wheel, every horn on the highway making me jump. That night, I put the recorder back on the table, staring at it for hours. It hasn't spoken again. Not yet. But I feel the weight of it, like a ticket in my pocket I can't throw away. And I've started to notice something else. When I hear the horn at night now, it's not faint anymore. It's not drifting through the trees or echoing down the hills. It's sharp, near. Once last week, it was so loud the windows rattled. My wife sat up in bed, eyes wide, and whispered, "Was that a train?" She heard it. She never had before. I didn't answer her. I couldn't, because I was already listening, waiting for the next sound. The knock. It hasn't come yet, but it will. And when it does, I don't think it'll stop with me. Because I've begun to realize something I wish I never had. The tunnel isn't just a place. It's not even just a haunting, it's a hunger. Every decade, every few years, it takes someone new. A crew, a hiker, a worker too stubborn to leave. It lures them in with sound, with light, with memory. It feeds on their fear, their fire, their flesh, and when the world forgets them, the tunnel doesn't. It keeps them. I don't know how long I've been carrying it with me, how long the rails have been laid beneath my feet. But I know this. Sooner or later, it'll collect its debt. And when you're driving some lonely Pennsylvania back road and you hear a horn in the distance where no tracks run, don't stop your car. Don't open your windows. Don't listen too close. Because once you hear the passengers, once you hear them pleading to be let out, it's already too late. And you'll know what I've always known. The train never left. The fire crackled low, and the cold edge of night pressed in like a hand against my chest. I'd been on the road for weeks, drifting from one RV park to another, looking for peace in the hum of the tires and the quiet of open space. But if you've camped long enough in America's forgotten corners, you know peace is a fragile thing. You hear the stories, passed over picnic tables, whispered by strangers leaning closer to the firelight. Stories that start with laughter but end with silence because we all know some of them are true. I never set out to collect those stories, but they seem to find me, one campsite at a time. There's a weight in the air at certain parks, like the land itself remembers what it's seen. You can feel it before the sun even dips below the trees. The stillness, the way conversations falter, the way shadows fall a little too long across the gravel. Locals call them RV park legends. But when you're the one parked under that same old oak, listening to the wind rattle your awning, the word legend feels too safe, too clean. These are the tales that chase you back into your rig at night, where you double-check the locks and pray that the sound outside is just a raccoon. I remember one night in particular at a park tucked deep in Oklahoma. It looked harmless enough when I pulled in, an overgrown strip of gravel lots ringed by a few sagging trailers that hadn't moved in years. The office was closed, a paper sign flapping in the wind, so I slipped cash into the drop box and backed my RV into a corner spot under a half-dead cottonwood. The air felt wrong even before I cut the engine, heavy and stale, like it hadn't moved in years. By dusk, the place was too quiet. Every window in the neighboring rigs dark, every curtain drawn tight. I was cooking dinner on my little propane stove when I first noticed it. A smell. Damp earth, but sharper, metallic, like rust and rain-soaked nails. I kept glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see smoke, but there was nothing. No one else came out, not a single door opened, and that silence wore on me until the hair on my arms prickled. I tried to laugh it off, just nerves, just a lonely night, but when the first knock came, I froze. It wasn't on my door. It was on the side of the rig, low, deliberate 3 solid thuds. I yanked the door open, flashlight in hand, but the beam hit nothing. Empty gravel. Quiet trees. My heart hammered as I swung the light down, expecting raccoons, but the dust at my tires was smooth, no tracks. I shut the door hard and told myself it was just the wind rattling something loose. But then it came again, softer this time, on the opposite side. a measured rhythm like someone testing the walls. I remember whispering out loud, "Don't you dare," as if my voice alone could scare it away. I wanted to pack up right then and tear down the highway, but there was something paralyzing about the way that sound moved, circling, patient, like whatever it was knew I was alone and it had all night to wait. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard breathing, close, too close. By dawn, I was packed and rolling out before the sun broke, gravel spitting under my tires. And when I finally pulled over 100 miles down the road, I noticed something streaked along the side of the rig. 3 long smears, brown and dry, too dark to be rust, too thick to be dirt. I scrubbed them off before I let myself too much about it. That wasn't the only night like that. These legends, they follow the highways, weaving from one campsite to the next. I heard a man in Arizona swear that a light followed him across the desert, glowing just out of reach of his taillights. Another couple in Maine told me about cabin lights they saw up the ridge every night, though no map showed a single road there. And once in Texas, I sat with a retired ranger who said he'd buried campers who weren't supposed to be there, whose names no one could find in any record. He never smiled when he said it. He just stared into the fire and muttered, "The land takes back what it wants." Maybe you felt it yourself. That flicker of movement in the corner of your eye when you step out to check the hookups, the way the forest falls silent all at once as if holding its breath. Maybe you've told yourself it's nothing, that you're imagining it. But I've learned that sometimes the nothing we dismiss has teeth, and when it finally decides to sink them in, there isn't much you can do but hope you've got the sense to move before it's too late. I keep telling myself these stories are warnings, not curses, that each one carries a lesson if you listen close enough. In Oklahoma, the knock at my door taught me to trust that first coil of dread in my stomach instead of brushing it off. In Arizona, the man with the desert light reminded me not to follow what looks like guidance without questioning where it leads. And every time I roll into a new park, I look for the signs now, the silence, the stillness, the way the trees seem to lean in too close. But here's the truth. No matter how much you prepare, no matter how many lessons you stack like sandbags around your heart, the unexplained finds its way through. It's in the stories that slip into your ears at night when you can't sleep. It's in the faces of strangers you meet at the water spigot who seem too eager to leave the moment you smile back. It's in the dirt under your boots when you step into places that don't want you there. And once you've heard enough of these tales, once you've lived through enough of them yourself, you start to wonder if the real danger isn't the thing outside at all. Maybe the real danger is how easily you begin to believe. I pulled into a park outside Flagstaff one autumn evening, tired from a long day on the road. The mountains loomed in the distance, dark against the fading sky, and the air smelled of pine and cooling earth. It should have been comforting, but the moment I cut the engine, I felt something like a hand at the back of my neck, an instinct that whispered I should keep driving. Still, exhaustion won. I paid the old man at the office, who barely looked at me, his eyes fixed somewhere behind me as though something was moving in the trees. The lot was nearly full, rigs lined side by side, but not a single curtain was open. No campfires, no laughter, just the low hum of generators and the occasional creak of settling wood. I parked between 2 older fifth wheels, both so weathered they looked abandoned. As night fell, the temperature dropped fast, and I decided to walk to the restroom before locking myself in for the night. That's when I saw it, the first flicker of light at the edge of the forest. Not a flashlight beam, not a lantern, but something softer, almost like fireflies clumped together in a shape too steady, too deliberate. I stopped, my breath clouding in the cold air, and watched it hover between the trees. It didn't move closer, didn't fade. It just waited, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. I told myself it was someone with a lantern. I told myself to ignore it. But when I returned 20 minutes later, the light was still there, in the same place, watching through the pines. I shut every blind in my RV, turned on the fan to drown the silence, and tried to convince myself sleep would come. But the night stretched thin, and each time I cracked the blinds, the light was still there, patient. By dawn, it was gone, but not for long. The following night, it returned, closer. This time, I could see its reflection on the wet gravel, even hear a faint hum beneath the wind. My stomach twisted with dread, but I didn't leave. I wanted to prove to myself it was nothing, that I wasn't falling into the paranoia of campfire tales. Yet deep down, I knew I was waiting for it to prove me wrong. On the third night, it came to my door. I didn't hear knocking, not like Oklahoma. Instead, it was the hum, steady, vibrating through the thin aluminum walls, resonating in my bones. The blinds glowed faintly, as though someone had pressed a lantern to the glass. My breath hitched as I stood frozen in the dark, every nerve screaming at me to stay still. The hum rose higher, almost like a voice I couldn't quite understand, a language stretched thin across frequency. I don't know how long I stood there. Minutes? Hours? When the sound finally faded, I pulled the blinds open and found nothing. No footprints in the gravel, no lingering glow, just the forest, silent and unbroken. I left before sunrise, my wheels barely touching the pavement as I fled down the mountain road. A week later, at another camp further south, I overheard two men talking by their fire. They spoke about the Lantern Watcher, a light that drifts through the trees, drawn to travelers who ignore their gut. One swore his brother followed it one night and never came back. The other just stared at the flames and said, "It doesn't need to knock, it waits until you open the door yourself." I kept my mouth shut, but inside, I knew I'd seen it. Or worse, it had seen me. The thing about these legends is that they're not told to scare you for fun. They're warnings, wrapped in stories, carried from traveler to traveler because no one wants to admit how close they've come. They don't end with neat explanations. They don't fade when the morning sun cuts through the mist. They stay with you, a gnawing presence in your chest, every time you pull into a quiet, empty park. There was a time I thought I was stronger than the fear, that I could rationalize everything away, the knocks, the lights, the silence. But somewhere along the line, I realized the fear wasn't weakness. It was instinct. The same instinct that kept me alive on back roads slick with ice, that told me to avoid the parks where every site looked occupied but no one ever stepped outside. Fear is a language, and when you learn to listen, it starts making sense. I've noticed how it creeps in differently each time. In Oklahoma, it was sound, the knock, the breathing, the patient rhythm. In Flagstaff, it was light and vibration, a steady hum that tested the edges of sanity. And in New Mexico, at a park surrounded by red rock cliffs, it was absence itself. No birds, no insects, no rustle of wind. Just silence so thick it pressed on your ears until you swore you could hear your own blood moving. That night, I sat outside staring at those cliffs, waiting for something to break the stillness. When it did, it wasn't what I expected. A voice carried across the lot, clear as day, a woman calling a name, Elias, over and over, each repetition sharper, angrier. I thought someone had lost a child, so I rose to help, scanning the rigs for open doors. But every trailer was sealed, every window black. And the voice kept coming, echoing off the cliffs, though the cadence was wrong. It never grew closer, never shifted, just repeated, exact and unchanging, like a record stuck on a single groove. I sat down hard, a cold knot settling in my chest. By midnight, the voice still hadn't stopped. At 2 a.m., it was still calling. And when I finally collapsed into uneasy sleep, I dreamed of a face I didn't know. Lips moving in silence while the cliffs behind her pulsed with shadow. I left the next morning without looking back, but for days afterward, I swore I heard that name whispered in the engine's rumble, in the hiss of tires on asphalt. Elias? Always Elias. I don't know if the name was for me or if it was meant to snare whoever listened long enough. But I've learned not every call is an invitation. Sometimes it's a trap. That's the danger of these campfire tales. They're not just stories you hear, they're experiences that lodge inside you, reshaping how you see the road, the woods, the silence of night. They remind you that RV parks aren't just places to rest. They're stages where something ancient, something unspeaking, still plays its part. There's a park in Louisiana I'll never forget, not because of what I saw, but because of what I smelled. You expect the bayou to carry certain scents, damp rot, fish, mud baking in the sun, but this was different. When I pulled in, the air hung heavy with a sweetness that didn't belong, like overripe fruit left too long on a kitchen counter. I told myself it was just swamp gas, just the musk of the wetlands, but it clung to me, seeping into my clothes, following me from site to site. The man at the office didn't even take my name. He just waved me toward the far corner, where the moss draped thick over the trees and the ground sagged soft underfoot. The lot was empty except for one rig across the field, a faded Class A with its blinds drawn. I parked, leveled out, and stepped outside, but the stench grew stronger, thick enough to coat the back of my throat. It was sweet and sharp all at once, like flowers blooming in a graveyard. That night, I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The cicadas stopped their song at once, as though a curtain had dropped over the swamp. I sat by my little campfire, staring into the dark when the smell deepened, so strong it made my stomach turn. I rose, searching the trees with my flashlight, and for an instant I thought I saw shapes swaying among the moss. Not branches, not shadows. Tall, narrow, swaying like reeds. I shut myself in, but sleep wouldn't come. At 2 a.m, I woke to the sound of dripping, steady, slow tapping on the roof. But the sky was clear. I crept to the window, heart hammering, and there it was. Streaks running down the glass, thick and dark, catching the moonlight like syrup. I pressed closer, and the smell hit me like a punch, sickly sweet, impossible to breathe through. I gagged and stumbled back, slamming the blinds shut. By morning, the glass was clean, no streaks, no residue, nothing but dew sparkling on the windshield. I packed fast, desperate to leave, but before I pulled out, I glanced at the Class A across the field. For the first time, its blinds were open. A face watched me from inside, pale and blank, lips parted as though whispering. Then the blinds snapped shut, and I didn't wait to see more. I drove until the swamp was nothing but a smear in the rear view. Later, a fisherman in Mississippi told me about the sweet ones, spirits that follow the scent of rot, masking themselves with perfume that grows stronger the closer they come. He said, if you smell flowers where none grow, don't linger. Don't breathe too deep. And whatever you do, don't look them in the face. I never told him about Louisiana. I just nodded, feeling the memory bloom in my chest. Like poison. Not every encounter screams at you. Some creep soft, wearing the mask of normal. In Colorado, I parked in a mountain lot where the pines stood tall and the air felt sharp with cold. Families laughed at picnic tables, kids rode their bikes in circles, and for once, it seemed safe. I let myself relax. I grilled a burger, cracked a beer, leaned back in my chair. But as the sun dipped low, I realized something odd. The laughter hadn't stopped. Not once. Hours had passed, and the children were still circling, wheels crunching gravel in the same rhythm, over and over. The family still sat at the tables, though no one had eaten, no plates ever emptied. Their smiles didn't falter, their voices never broke. It was as though the entire campground had been caught in a loop, repeating the same gestures, the same words, endlessly. I tested it. I walked past one of the tables, nodding at a man with a cap. He looked at me, smiled wide, and said, "Evening." 10 minutes later, I passed again, and he said it the exact same way, same tone, same angle of his head. My skin crawled. I backed into my rig and shut the door, heart thudding. Through the blinds, I watched the kids circle long after dark, their wheels glowing faint in the lamplight, faces blank as mannequins. At midnight, the laughter finally stopped. The bikes leaned against trees. The families vanished into their trailers, lights winking out one by one. The silence that followed was worse, heavy, pressing, as if the mountain itself had exhaled and emptied the world of sound. I don't remember sleeping. I only remember waking at dawn, the campground deserted, every site abandoned. Not a trailer, not a tent, not a single sign anyone had been there at all. Sometimes I think these parks are traps, Not traps with teeth or claws, but traps of time, of silence, of repetition. They catch you in loops, in whispers, in scents that don't belong. And if you don't listen, if you don't pull yourself free, you risk becoming part of the story. Just another face behind the curtain, another whisper on the wind. I've seen too many to dismiss them all. Too many knocks, too many lights, too many loops to call coincidence. And each one leaves its mark, a little scar across the mind. You drive on, but you're never quite the same. You leave with the lesson, but the fear rides shotgun, reminding you that every campsite holds its own legend, waiting for someone tired enough, desperate enough, or curious enough to stay. And every time I settle into a new lot, I wonder, am I the traveler hearing the tale, or am I the next one caught inside it? I found myself in Kansas one summer, the kind of stretch where the road is so flat and endless that you forget what mountains or forests even feel like. The sky burned wide open, cornfields stretching in every direction, and by the time I reached a small RV park near a county fairground, I was grateful just to stop moving. The lot was half full. Dusty rigs lined up under flickering lamps. Children's bikes leaned against picnic tables, and someone grilled hot dogs that carried on the wind. Ordinary, almost comforting, until night came. That first evening, I noticed how the lamps didn't light right. The glow didn't reach the gravel, not really. It hung in the air like fog, caught mid-breath, and the shadows it cast seemed too long, bending in strange directions, pooling beneath the trailers as though the ground itself drank them up. I told myself I was tired, that Kansas heat could play tricks, but I couldn't shake the unease crawling under my skin. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of music, faint like a calliope carried on the wind. I pressed my ear to the wall. It wasn't a radio, wasn't anyone's speaker. It was carnival music, slow and warped, drifting just beyond the edge of hearing. I stepped to the window, heart pounding, and across the lot, the bikes that had leaned against the tables were gone. Every one of them. I crept outside, the air sticky and still. The music grew louder as I walked toward the fairground beyond the fence, and there, in the distance, pale lights blinked faintly, like rides whirring to life. But the fairground was closed, had been closed for years. The gate was chained, the lot overgrown, yet in the glow of those broken lamps, I swore I saw figures moving, slow, jerky, like marionettes dancing out of sync with their strings. The music rose, twisting higher until my pulse hammered in my ears. I backed away, stumbling into the gravel, eyes fixed on those lights. And then, just like that, it stopped. No music, no figures, no lights. Just the dark sweep of cornfields under a wide, empty sky. When I turned back to the RV lot, the bikes were back, leaned against the tables in neat little rows, every wheel perfectly aligned, as though placed there by hands too precise to be children's. The next morning, I drove to the gas station, desperate for someone to laugh it off, to tell me I'd mistaken the fairground lights for lightning bugs. The attendant only shook his head and said, "They still play out there sometimes. Best not to go listening." He didn't look me in the eye when he said it. I carried that sound with me for miles, the warped notes of a carnival long gone, the way shadows bent wrong beneath the lamps. And I realized then that not all legends come from wilderness or isolation. Some bloom in the middle of towns, in places worn soft by laughter, where joy once lived. When it rots deep. Not long after, I rolled into a park in Nevada, carved out of the desert like a scar. The ground was hard-packed, the wind fierce, and the air shimmered with heat. Only a handful of rigs sat scattered across the sand. No trees, no cover, just wide sky and sunburnt earth. It should have been safe in its openness, but the desert has its own way of whispering. That night, as the wind rattled the rig, I heard footsteps circling outside, crunching gravel slow and deliberate. I snapped the blinds open, flashlight cutting the dark, but nothing moved. The footsteps stopped when I looked, started when I turned away. Hours passed like that, sound without source, motion without form. Then, near dawn, I saw them. Impressions in the sand, circling the rig in perfect rings. Not boot prints, not bare feet, something in between. long toes dragging grooves, heels barely touching down. The circles wound tighter and tighter toward my door, but they stopped just short, as if waiting for me to open it. I didn't. I drove out the second the sun rose, my tires crushing those tracks flat. In the rear view, I watched the wind sweep over them, erasing the shapes in moments, as though the desert had swallowed its secret back down. That's the thing about the road. It doesn't always roar at you with terror. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hums. Sometimes it smells sweet when it shouldn't, or bends shadows in ways you can't explain. And if you're not careful, if you don't listen, those whispers grow teeth. Every legend I've heard, every story I've lived, teaches me the same lesson in different words. The road remembers. It remembers the joy, the grief, the laughter, the silence, and it breathes that memory back into the ones who pass through, molding it into sights, sounds, smells that claw at the edges of your sanity. We travelers like to believe we're the ones moving forward, carving our path across the map. But the truth is, some places don't move on. They linger. And if you stay long enough, they make sure you linger with them. In Oregon, I stopped at a small RV park near Tillamook, tucked between the damp evergreens where mist clung low to the ground. The sign at the entrance was half fallen, the paint peeling, but I was too tired to care. I'd been driving since dawn, and the thought of shutting down for a night was stronger than the whisper in my gut that told me to keep going. The air smelled of rain and wood smoke, heavy with that coastal damp that soaks into everything. I backed into a site near the tree line, leveled out, and told myself I'd finally get some rest. The first odd thing was the laughter. It drifted faintly through the mist, high-pitched, like children chasing one another around the playground. I looked out, but the swings were still, the slides empty, the gravel undisturbed. The laughter carried on, rising and falling, yet no bodies made it. I waited for someone to call them inside, for a door to slam, for the sound to fade, but it went on, threading through the night like a record left spinning. I shut my windows, drew the blinds, tried to ignore it. But at one point, when I reached to pull the curtain tight, I froze. The glass fogged over, not from my own breath, but from outside. A small handprint smeared into the condensation, fingers long, pressed too high to belong to a child. My chest locked. I stumbled back, watching as another handprint appeared, then another, tracing slow arcs across the window. I wanted to believe it was condensation trickling down, creating shapes. But the prints lingered, spreading wider until they framed the glass like a row of watching eyes. I turned every light on in the rig and sat clutching a knife I'd pulled from the drawer, listening to that laughter spin endless through the night. At dawn, the prints were gone. The windows shone clean, no smear, no streak. The park was still. No kids, no voices, no sign of life at all. Every trailer stood quiet, blinds pulled, like they'd been abandoned years ago. Later that week, I stopped for gas in another town and mentioned it to the clerk, careful not to sound crazy. He only shook his head and muttered, "Don't camp in the mist. It belongs to them." He wouldn't say who them was. He just rang me up and avoided my eyes until I left. Not long after, I found myself in Arkansas, in a park that looked nearly swallowed by trees. I'd barely set my stabilizers when an old man in a faded ball cap shuffled up. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. He just pointed to the tree line and said, "Don't go past there after dark." I asked why, but he only repeated it, his voice shaking. "Don't go past there after dark." Then he turned and walked away. That night, I couldn't shake his words. I sat by the fire, staring at those woods, the shadows thick between the trunks. Around midnight, I heard it. A voice calling, soft, urgent. "Help me." It was a woman, or at least it sounded like one. The tone was desperate, raw. I rose before I realized what I was doing, flashlight in hand, feet dragging toward the tree line. But as I stepped closer, something in my chest screamed, "Stop." The voice repeated, the exact same inflection, the exact same words, "Help me," as if caught in a loop. I stood frozen at the edge of the trees, the beam of my flashlight cutting across endless dark. And then the voice changed. It wasn't pleading anymore. It was mocking. The words stretched, distorted, curling into laughter that didn't belong in a human throat. I staggered back, heart hammering, and fled to my rig, slamming the door, locking every latch. From inside, I could still hear it. Not distant now, but close. Right outside, circling, repeating, "Help me," over and over until the sun broke through and the woods fell silent again. By morning, the old man was gone. His site stood empty. No trace of him or his trailer. When I asked at the office, the woman looked confused. "We don't have anyone like that staying here," she said. "But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that if I'd taken one more step into that forest, I wouldn't be here to tell it." These stories stick because they burrow deeper than the surface. They force you to question your own senses, your own instincts. You tell yourself you're rational, grounded, immune to legends. But when the mist presses against your window, when voices mimic desperation, when laughter comes from empty air, you realize you're not untouchable. You're just another traveler parked in the wrong place, at the wrong time, listening to the wrong sound. And maybe that's what haunts me the most, that sense that the road isn't random, that certain places choose you, pulling you in, testing whether you'll listen or whether you'll fall into their rhythm. Each park has its lesson, each legend its price. Ignore it, and you become part of the story. Another name whispered across the fire, another warning no one believes until it's too late. Because the truth is, not every camper comes back. Some vanish into the mist, some follow lights, some step into forests after dark and never step out again. And the parks keep standing, waiting for the next rig to roll in, the next traveler too tired to listen to their gut. And each time I pull into a new one, engine ticking, tires crunching gravel, I wonder, am I the storyteller this time, or am I about to become the tale? I pulled into West Texas under a sky so wide it felt like it could crush me. The desert sprawled endless in every direction. A flat plain broken only by scrub and the occasional leaning windmill. The RV park was little more than a strip of gravel lots beside an old highway. The office stood abandoned, its windows dusty, a faded open sign half faded in the glass. A jar sat on the counter inside with a handwritten note. "Pay what you can, stay where you like." I chose a spot near the fence line, the wire sagging, rusted and broken in places. The sun slipped low, painting the desert in blood and gold. I thought I'd be alone that night, but as the dark spread, I noticed lights flickering far out on the plain. Small, low to the ground, glowing steady, then winking out, only to reappear in another place. At first, I thought they were oil lamps, maybe ranch hands working the fields, though no ranch sat within miles. Then I considered swamp gas, though this was no swamp. The desert air was too dry, the land too brittle. Still, I tried to dismiss it until I realized the lights were moving in a pattern. Circles, then spirals, then sharp lines across the horizon. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. I stayed inside my rig, blinds cracked, watching. Around midnight, one of the lights broke from the rest and drifted toward the park. Slow, steady, purposeful. My pulse hammered as it grew closer, glowing white-blue, hovering a foot above the ground. It stopped just outside the fence, burning against the dark, humming faintly like an electric wire. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I thought of Flagstaff, of the lantern watcher, of the warnings whispered by strangers who'd seen too much. I knew better than to open the door, but then the light pulsed, brighter, as if waiting. And for the first time I realized it wasn't random, wasn't blind. It was aware of me. It hovered there for hours until dawn broke pale and cold. Only then did it fade, dissolving into the morning haze. When I stepped outside, my boots crunching gravel, I found a line burned into the ground just beyond the fence. A perfect circle, scorched into the sand, black as coal. I left that morning without looking back, but I carried the shape with me in my mind, the way it seared into the earth, and I wondered how many others had seen it. How many had stepped across that fence, drawn toward the light, never to be seen again. Later, in a cafe 2 towns over, I mentioned it to a woman pouring coffee. She froze mid-pour, eyes wide. "You saw the fire circles," she whispered. "They come for the ones who don't belong. Don't go back." She refused to say more, retreating into the kitchen and leaving me staring at my reflection in the black surface of my coffee, the circle burning still in my thoughts. The road teaches you patience, but it also teaches you humility. You realize how small you are against the endless landscapes, how fragile your walls of fiberglass and steel truly are. Every time I park, I tell myself I've learned that I'll know when to listen, when to leave. But then the stories find me again. In Missouri, it wasn't lights or laughter or voices. It was silence. A park on the edge of the Ozarks, ringed by forests so thick it seemed to choke the air. I pulled in at dusk, the lot empty except for a single camper at the far end. A man stood outside chopping wood. He looked up as I parked, gave a curt nod, and went back to work. That night, the silence was unbearable. No crickets, no owls, no wind through the trees, just a void that pressed against my ears until I swore I could hear my own heartbeat. Around midnight, I looked out and saw the man still standing there, axe in hand, staring into the woods. He hadn't lit a fire. He hadn't gone inside. He just stood, unmoving, like a shadow pinned to the earth. I watched him for hours until exhaustion finally claimed me. When I woke at dawn, his camper was gone. No tracks in the gravel, no woodpile, no sign anyone had ever been there. Just empty ground, the silence lingering like a weight on my chest. I told myself it was a dream, that I'd imagined him. But weeks later, I met another traveler in Kentucky who spoke of the same park, the same man with the axe, standing silent through the night. "He's been there for years," the traveler whispered, eyes downcast. "Always leaving, always arriving, never belonging to either." And that's the way of these legends. They don't fade. They repeat like grooves on a record, playing over and over for whoever happens to listen. Each one a warning, a reminder, a trap waiting to be sprung. I've started to wonder if the road itself is alive, weaving these tales through the parks, binding us with echoes of the ones who came before. Maybe the legends aren't separate at all. Maybe they're threads of the same story, unraveling across the country, waiting for us to follow them to the end. Every night I park, I ask myself the same question. When the silence deepens, when the lights draw close, when the laughter comes from nowhere, will I have the strength to leave? Or will I linger too long until I'm just another story whispered around a campfire? My name lost, my rig left behind, blinds forever drawn. It was in Montana where I felt the closest to breaking. The sky stretched wide and pale, mountains jutting sharp against the horizon, their peaks capped with snow even in summer. The RV park sat at the base of a ridge, a scatter of gravel lots near a creek that ran fast and cold. At first glance, it looked harmless. A handful of campers, smoke rising from fire pits, the smell of trout cooking on an open flame. After the places I'd been, it felt almost safe. Almost. I parked near the water, the sound of the current lulling me into a rare calm. But as night fell, the air turned colder than it should have, a sharp, biting chill that seeped through the rig walls. I bundled in blankets, listening to the creek gurgle and rush. That's when I noticed the pattern. The water wasn't rushing in random tones. It was repeating, a rhythm, like words just beyond my hearing. At first, I thought I was overtired, my brain turning sound into meaning. But the longer I listened, the clearer it became. The creek wasn't babbling. It was speaking. My name. Over and over. Soft, distorted, carried in the rush of water. I shot upright, every muscle locked. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound seeped through, vibrating in my skull. I bolted outside, desperate to prove it was nothing, that it was just noise. But when I reached the bank, the creek shifted. The sound wasn't my name anymore. It was a scream. Not loud, not sharp, but muffled like someone drowning just beneath the surface. I leaned forward, flashlight trembling in my hand, scanning the dark water. Ripples formed, though no stone had fallen, no branch had stirred. The scream stretched, broke into gasps, then silence. My chest heaved. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rocks, and then I saw them. Handprints pressed into the wet earth along the bank, small, narrow, too many to count, as if dozens had clawed their way up from the creek only to vanish into the night. I didn't sleep. I sat behind locked doors, listening as the water rose higher, louder, pressing against the rig like a voice demanding to be heard. By dawn, the creek had lowered again, quiet, harmless, like nothing had happened at all. But when I stepped outside, the handprints were still there, dark and fresh, circling my tires in a perfect ring. I left fast, gravel spitting under my wheels. I didn't care where I went, only that it was away. The mountains loomed in the mirror, growing smaller as I fled. Yet even miles down the highway, I swore I still heard the water whispering, my name clinging to the hum of the road. In Idaho, it wasn't water. It was mirrors. The park was tucked into a canyon, red rock cliffs towering high above. I rolled in late, the sun already gone, shadows pooling deep in the ravine. The lot was nearly empty, just 3 rigs scattered wide apart. Mine was parked beside the old bathhouse, its windows broken, its door hanging loose on one hinge. I told myself I'd avoid it, use the rig instead, but by midnight I was too restless to sleep. I stepped out, needing air, needing distance from the press of the canyon walls. That's when I saw it, my reflection. Not in glass, not in water, in the shadows, a darker outline that moved when I moved, but delayed. A second too slow, a breath too late. I froze, staring at it. The shape was me, but not me. Taller, shoulders hunched, mouth parted in a grin I didn't wear. I backed toward the rig, heart hammering, and the reflection tilted its head, mirroring the move, but twisting too far. Bones bending wrong. The grin stretched wider, splitting across the face like a wound. I tore back inside, slamming the door, blinds down, heart pounding like a war drum. But every reflective surface in that rig, every window, every dark gloss of the microwave door, showed it. The wrong me. Standing just behind, waiting, smiling that endless, broken smile. By morning, the reflections were gone. I smashed the bathroom mirror before I left, shards glittering in the sun. But even now, some nights on the road, I avoid my own reflection. I fear I'll see it again, grinning through the glass, patient, waiting for me to finally meet its gaze too long. These parks, these places, they test different senses, different instincts. Sound in Montana, reflection in Idaho, smell in Louisiana, silence in Missouri. Each one chiseling away at the edges of reason, pulling you closer to the line where belief and madness meet. And the truth is, the more I've seen, the thinner that line becomes. I used to tell myself these were coincidences, tricks of exhaustion, fragments of stories I'd heard blending into long nights on the road. But then the patterns emerge, the repetitions, the way each encounter feels less like chance and more like design. As though the road itself is teaching, testing, pushing me towards something. And the worst part, I'm starting to think the road remembers who listens and who doesn't. Because the more I listen, the more it calls. South Carolina was where it all came to a head. I had been running for weeks, chasing daylight, trying to stay one step ahead of whatever it was that had been dogging me from one RV park to the next. But you can't outrun the road. It waits, it bends, and sometimes it corners you in ways you don't expect. The park was small, carved out beside a stretch of pine forest, the kind where the trees grow so close together they look like prison bars. The lot was mostly empty, save for a few rigs sitting dark, their blinds drawn. I almost kept going, but exhaustion had hollowed me out, and I told myself just one night, just enough to close my eyes. The air was thick with humidity, pressing damp against my skin. Cicadas screamed into the dusk, their rhythm wild and uneven, as though they'd lost the natural beat of their song. I cooked a small meal, sat with the fan humming, and tried to ignore the pull of the trees. But when the night fell heavy, I heard it, a tapping, soft at first, then louder. Not on the door, on the windows. I froze, every nerve screaming. The blinds rattled faintly with each tap, as though a fingertip pressed and dragged. I told myself it was branches in the wind, until I realized the trees were yards away. No branches could reach this close. I stood, trembling, and peeled back one corner of the blinds. For a split second, I saw nothing but my own reflection. Then it moved. Its eyes were mine, but glassy, hollow. Its lips twitched into a smile I wasn't making. And when the reflection raised a hand, fingers tapping the glass from the wrong side. I dropped the blinds and staggered back. The tapping grew frantic, racing from one window to the next, circling the rig. I bolted the door, heart hammering, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, more desperate, until it felt like the walls themselves were caving in. And then, silence. I held my breath, waiting. Minutes passed. Then a whisper came, low and steady, from just beyond the thin metal door. My name, spoken in my own voice. I couldn't take it anymore. Panic surged, raw and blinding. I grabbed the keys, fired the engine, and tore out of that lot, gravel spitting, headlights slashing through the dark pines. In the mirror, I swore I saw figures standing at the tree line. Dozens of them, still and waiting, their faces pale imitations of my own. I didn't stop driving until dawn, when the sun rose hot and sharp over the horizon. My hands shook on the wheel, knuckles white, breath shallow. I pulled over at a rest area, cut the engine, and sat in silence. No tapping, no whispers, just birdsong in the morning light. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift, if only slightly. But here's the truth. Escape is never clean. You can drive away from the park, from the trees, from the circles burned into the ground or the voices in the creek, but you can't drive away from what you've seen. The road carries it with you, stitching into your thoughts, feeding it back through every shadow, every silence, every long stretch of highway. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the legends aren't warnings at all. Maybe they're invitations. The road isn't just dotted with stories. It is the story, alive and shifting, searching for new voices to add to its chorus. I tell myself I'm only a witness, that I'm just passing through. But sometimes when the night is still and the wind rattles the awning, I hear it again, my name, whispered low, curling through the air like smoke. And I wonder how long before I'm no longer the one telling the tale, but the one trapped inside it. Because every RV park has its legend. And one day, if you're not careful, that legend will have you. I kept driving after South Carolina, chasing the illusion that if I stayed in motion, I could outrun what had been following me. Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, one park after another, each with its own weight, its own peculiar silence. Some were empty, left to rot, weeds cracking the gravel pads and office doors swinging on rusted hinges. Others were full, or at least they appeared to be, but something in the stillness told me the laughter, the music, the warmth were rehearsed, stretched too thin, like a mask pulled over hollow bone. But it was in Tennessee that I finally understood. The park was new, fresh gravel, bright signs, a smiling attendant in a polo shirt, families barbecued, kids rode scooters, dogs barked happily at the ends of their leashes. It was everything a traveler longs for after weeks of unease. I parked, plugged in, sat outside in the warm dusk with a beer in hand and told myself, this is what it should be. This is safe. Yet as the night wore on, I noticed the repetition again. The same boy circling the loop on his scooter, waving at me every time with the same wide smile. The same couple laughing at their picnic table, their hands frozen around untouched plates. The same dog barking in the exact same rhythm, never breaking, never tiring. By midnight, every rig had gone dark, every lantern extinguished, every voice silenced, except the boy. He kept circling, his scooter wheels grinding the gravel in an endless loop, his eyes never blinking. I stood at my window, breath shallow, as he stopped in front of my rig, lifted his head, and smiled too wide, teeth gleaming in the lamplight. Then he whispered my name. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember stepping outside. All I remember is the cold grip of panic pulling me backward as I slammed the door shut again, heart threatening to burst through my ribs. When I looked back through the blinds, the boy was gone. The lot was empty, silent, still. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the driver's seat, keys in my lap, waiting for the first streak of dawn. And when it came, painting the rigs in soft gold, I realized they were gone too. Every single trailer, every motorhome, every fifth wheel. The park was empty, as though no one had ever been there. That was when the truth finally hit me. The legends aren't just stories about places. They're about people, about us. We bring them with us, carry them in our mirrors, in the hum of our engines, in the silence that waits outside our windows. The road doesn't just connect towns, it connects every story, every fear, every disappearance. And once you've heard enough of them, once you've lived inside them, you're no longer separate. You're part of the thread. Now, when I pull into a park, I don't ask what the legend is. I ask whether I'll be strong enough to leave before it decides to claim me. I walk the gravel, listen to the trees, breathe the air deep into my lungs, and remind myself to pay attention. Because ignoring the signs, that's how people vanish. That's how they become names, whispered in the dark. How they fade into campfire warnings told by strangers who don't even know your face. Only the echo of what you left behind. Fear isn't weakness. It's the one tool we have left. Fear tells us when the laughter is wrong, when the water speaks, when the silence presses too heavy. Fear sharpens us, keeps us awake, drives us to move before the trap closes. Without it, we'd all be sitting ducks in these parks, waiting for the night to hollow us out. So I embrace it now. I let it guide me. I let it remind me that the road is alive, that every mile carries weight, that every stop is a test. And I carry the lessons with me like charms. Never ignore the knock. Never follow the light. Never answer the voice. Never trust that smile's too wide. Because if you're lucky, you'll leave with the story. If you're not, you'll stay behind as part of it. And maybe that's what keeps me talking, what keeps me telling these tales into the night. Not because I want to scare you, but because I want you to listen, to really listen. The road doesn't give second chances. When the knock comes, when the laughter doesn't fade, when the mist presses close, you have one choice. Believe it, respect it, and leave before it takes you. Because somewhere out there, an RV is parked with the blinds drawn, a chair still warm by the fire, the owner's name never spoken again. And someone new will roll into that space. Someone tired, someone trusting, someone who doesn't know the legend yet, until it's too late. So the next time you pull off the highway, gravel crunching under your tires, take a breath. Look around. Listen close. If the silence feels too heavy, if the air smells too sweet, if the shadows bend wrong, don't dismiss it. Don't laugh it off. Pack up. Move on. Because the road is full of stories, and you don't want to become the next one whispered in the dark. That's what I've learned, driving from one edge of this country to the other, gathering the voices of parks that never forget. And if you're hearing mine now, if you're sitting in your rig with the night pressing close, remember this. Every RV park has its legend, and one day you'll find the one that has yours. I worked as a seasonal ranger in a state park in Colorado, the kind of park that doesn't make the glossy tourist brochures. It wasn't Rocky Mountain National Park with its sprawling ridgelines and endless lines of visitors. Ours was smaller, tucked in a transition zone between Ponderosa pine forest and open high desert scrub. A place with a single paved road that wound into a campground, a dozen primitive sites scattered around a slow creek, and one aging ranger station at the center. It was quiet, usually. Too quiet sometimes. My job that season was simple in description but complicated in reality. I was assigned to monitor the campground, do light maintenance, check on RVs and campers, and make sure no one overstayed their limit. In a park like this, with limited staff, one ranger did the work of 4. I hiked, I checked trail signs, I kept track of campfire permits. Nights, I drove the loop road to make sure no one had pulled in after hours. Days, I walked the perimeter where sagebrush met pine. The campground itself wasn't special. Just a loop road with gravel pullouts, most of them angled for RVs, a few for tents. Each site had the same thing, a cracked picnic table, a bent fire ring, a post with a faded number. But from the first week I started, I noticed something strange. Not with the campers, not with the wildlife, but with the campground itself. I'd finish my night patrol, mark down which RV was in which site, then come back in the morning to find them shifted, not moved by the owners. I'm not talking about a guy backing his camper a few feet to straighten it out. I mean, full relocation. An RV that had been in Site 6 would be in Site 4. A camper that had been parked near the creek would be at the far end of the loop, 30 yards away. At first, I thought I was just mistaken. New job, long hours, maybe I was mixing up the numbers. But I kept a log. I wrote them down carefully, and every morning they didn't match. I asked a few campers about it casually. Most just shrugged. A couple laughed, assuming I was joking. One man, a wiry retiree from Kansas with a weather-faded trailer, told me flatly, "Yeah, we woke up this morning and the whole view out our window was different. I thought maybe I was dreaming. But no, we're in a different site. Don't know how that happened. We sure didn't move it." He said it with a kind of forced humor, like he didn't want to think about it too much. I reported it to my supervisor. He told me, half smiling to double-check my maps, and lay off the ghost stories. That was his phrase. Ghost stories. But something was wrong. The ground never showed tracks, not from tires, not from jacks or hitches being reset. The gravel at each site looked the same in the morning as it had at night, undisturbed as though the RVs had always been there. The creek made it worse. Sites closest to the creek had willows and cottonwoods shading them. One evening, I walked past a site where a family of 4 was grilling dinner, their RV parked nose out toward the water. The next morning, they were 2 sites back from the creek, the grill cold, the father looking around like he'd lost something. He waved at me stiffly. I didn't wave back, because behind him, where their RV had been the night before, was bare ground. No tracks, no drag marks, no nothing. That's when I started staying up later, making notes, not just of where the RVs were parked, but of what angle, what trees framed their awnings, what shadows the moon made on their sides. I even started sketching them in my notebook. And still, every morning they were different. There's a particular kind of silence you get in the Colorado high desert at night. The kind that presses on your ears, broken only by the occasional crack of cooling stone or the distant bark of a coyote. But around the campground there was a second silence, a heavier one, like the air itself was listening. I began to feel it when I did my rounds. At 2 a.m, with a flashlight in one hand and my radio hissing static in the other, I would stop by each site. The campers slept soundly, curtains drawn, no movement inside. Everything in place. But the silence didn't feel right. It wasn't empty silence, it was expectant. And once or twice, I thought I saw movement where there should have been none. The silhouettes of the RVs seemed to lean just slightly, as if they weren't parked so much as balancing. One night, I sat in my truck at the far end of the loop, lights off, engine silent. I wanted to catch whatever was happening. I wanted to see it for myself. Midnight came and went. The stars wheeled overhead. My eyelids drooped. Then, at some hour I couldn't name, the air changed. The silence deepened, and a strange vibration passed through the ground. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a truck rumbling by on the highway. It was subtle, rhythmic, like a distant drumbeat, but felt more than heard. My teeth ached with it. I looked up, and I swear I saw the campground shift. Not the campers. Not the people. The entire loop road. The trees leaned, the creek bent, the arrangement of sites folded into itself like a pattern being shuffled. It happened without noise, without dust or cracking branches, without the violent chaos you'd expect. It was smooth, like the campground was rearranging itself. I blinked, and it was over. But in the morning, the RVs were in different places again. I told no one. Who would believe me? My supervisor already thought I was spooked too easily. The campers were either oblivious or pretending not to notice. But I noticed. I started marking trees with chalk, just small lines at eye level. When I came back the next morning, the chalk marks were gone. Or worse, they were on different trees. I drove stakes into the ground, but the next day they'd be in slightly different angles, like someone had pulled them out and re-driven them. I thought about setting up cameras, but part of me didn't want to see it, not really. Because if I saw it clearly, I'd have to admit it was real. There's another thing I haven't mentioned yet. Something smaller, but maybe worse. The campers themselves, they changed. Not much at first. A shirt color different from the night before. A child with a toy I hadn't seen them playing with the previous evening. An older couple whose RV had one window missing when I could have sworn it had been there the night before. Little differences. Subtle. And when I tried to talk to them, when I asked questions like, "Hey, didn't you have a blue cooler yesterday?" They looked at me like I was mistaken, like I was the one who had changed. It was happening to the people too, not just the campground. The last clear memory I have before everything unraveled was of a particular RV. It was newer, big, with a wide slide out and a satellite dish on the roof. A family with 2 teenagers had parked there. I remember them clearly because the father was friendly, always waving, always asking about hiking trails. One night I did my rounds and passed their site. I saw him standing outside in the dark, arms crossed, staring at the creek. He didn't move when I waved, didn't speak. His eyes looked pale, unfocused, as though he was watching something deep in the water. The next morning, their RV was 3 sites down the loop. I went to check on them. The father was gone. The mother told me he had decided to go home early. She said it casually, like it wasn't strange that he'd left without the RV, without his family. But the boy looked at me with wide eyes like he wanted to say something. His lips trembled, and then he just shook his head. That was when I realized something wasn't just moving the campground. It was taking pieces of people too. I stopped sleeping after that. I patrolled until dawn, staring at the lines of campers, waiting for the vibration, for the shuffle of trees and gravel. I didn't trust the silence anymore. I didn't trust the people in the RVs. One night, walking the loop, I noticed that the road itself didn't feel the same length. It was shorter. I was sure of it. The curve that usually took me 10 minutes to walk now only took 5. The sites were closer together, and when I tried to leave, when I drove the truck out toward the main highway, I found myself circling back into the campground. The loop didn't end anymore. It just brought me back to the beginning. The first time I realized I couldn't leave, I sat in the cab of my truck with both hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. I had driven that loop road 100 times already. It should have been automatic. Gravel crunching under tires, the pine silhouettes parting, the wooden sign pointing back toward the ranger station and the state highway beyond. But instead, every time I turned that bend, I came back into the same curve of campsites, the same RVs, the same fire rings, the same people. It was as though the campground had folded in on itself, and I was sealed inside. I remember pulling off onto the shoulder and shutting off the engine, just listening to the faint tick of the cooling motor. The night air pressed down, colder than it should have been, though it was August. It smelled like wet stone, like river mud, though the creek was nearly dry. I told myself I was overtired, that I'd missed the turnoff in the dark, that I was circling in confusion. But then I saw my own tire tracks in the gravel, multiples of them, layered over each other, as if I had been looping the campground for hours. The radio on my belt crackled. For a moment I thought it was dispatch, my supervisor checking in, but it was just static. Static that almost, but not quite, sounded like voices. I put the truck in gear and drove again. This time I counted seconds under my breath, marking the distance. 120 seconds later, I passed the same leaning Ponderosa and the same camper with its porch light on. I stopped counting. The next morning, I tried walking out. I told myself maybe the truck was deceiving me, that headlights and fatigue and repetition were twisting my bearings. On foot, in daylight, I could orient myself. I slung on a pack with a canteen, a map, a compass, and I set out along the road. I walked and walked. The map said the campground loop was only 1.5 miles. The ranger station was 3 miles beyond. I should have been there in under an hour. But after 45 minutes, the road bent, and I found myself back at the loop. At first, I thought I'd gone the wrong way, but the chalk mark I'd scratched into the wooden signpost was there, faint, but visible. The same mark I had left before heading out. I had walked in a circle without ever turning. The compass needle jittered in my palm, twitching like a pinned insect. It pointed north, then spun, then stuck at east, then south. I tapped it, shook it. It didn't matter. It had no north to give me. When I trudged back into camp, the air smelled faintly metallic, like blood. I tried talking to the campers again, more directly this time. At Site 11, an older couple sat in folding chairs beside a vintage RV. They'd been there for days. I remembered their smiles, the way they fed the chipmunks that crept under their table. But when I approached, their smiles didn't reach their eyes. "You folks realize you've been moved?" I asked. My voice came out dry, cracked. "Your rig was near the creek last night. Now you're on the other side of the loop." The man chuckled softly, but it didn't sound like him. It was too slow, too deliberate, like he was trying on laughter for the first time. His wife kept staring at the ground. "We've always been right here," he said. I wanted to argue, wanted to show them my logbook, but the words lodged in my throat, because behind them, the trees didn't look right. The angles of the branches bent unnaturally, as though the whole grove had been rotated and shoved back into place. The wife finally looked up. Her eyes weren't her eyes anymore. They were pale, like they'd been washed out, and when she blinked, there was no moisture in it. Just skin dragging across skin. I left without another word. Nights became worse. That vibration returned, the subtle thrumming pulse in the ground. I felt it in my chest, in my teeth, even in the bones of my wrist where an old fracture still ached in the cold. It came at different hours, sometimes just after midnight, sometimes near dawn. Whenever it started, the silence grew absolute. Coyotes stopped calling. The wind stilled. The creek froze into glassy stillness, and then the shuffle would begin. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't even dramatic. The entire campground would rearrange. The road bent, the sights folded inward, the creek moved, its channel sliding like a snake through new ground. And the RVs, they slid with it, not like heavy machines, but like pawns on a board being nudged by a casual hand. One night, I stood outside with my flashlight off and just watched. An RV 30 yards away, a little Class C with faded stripes, shifted 5 feet to the left. It didn't roll. It didn't tip. It just jumped. Instantly there, as though it had always been in that spot. The family inside didn't stir, but I swore I heard muffled crying from somewhere deep in the walls. By the third week, my notes made no sense. I wrote obsessively, where campers were parked, what they looked like, which families were missing pieces of themselves. The entries contradicted each other. Whole sentences would appear in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. Lines like, "The campground wants them still. Don't look at the creek after dark. If I stay awake long enough, I won't be taken." I don't remember writing those, but they're there. And every morning, when I woke from what I thought was vigilance, there were more. The boy from the family with the satellite dish RV approached me one morning. His parents weren't with him. His clothes were inside out, his shoelaces undone. His skin was pale, blotchy, like he hadn't slept. "You see it too," he whispered. I nodded, throat tight. "It moves us," he said. "It doesn't ask. We're just in different places every day. My dad, he didn't go home. It took him." His eyes brimmed with tears, but he didn't cry. He looked older than he had before, aged overnight. "Don't go near the creek," he told me. "That's where it's closest." Then his mother called his name. Her voice was wrong, flat, stretched too thin, and he jerked like he'd been slapped. He ran back without looking at me again. When I turned toward the creek, the air shimmered faintly above it, like heat rising from asphalt. But the morning was cool, the sun barely above the ridgeline. The shimmer bent, then stilled, as though it knew I was watching. That day, I tried something desperate. I parked the truck at the edge of the loop and set out cross-country. No road, no trails, just straight through the pines toward where the state highway should have been. I kept my compass in my pocket despite its madness, telling myself to walk due east by the sun. I walked for an hour, 2. The pines thinned, then thickened, then thinned again. And then I broke into a clearing where the campground sat waiting for me. The same cracked picnic tables, the same bent fire rings, the same RVs. Except this time they were empty. The doors hung open, curtains fluttered, coolers sat overturned, food rotting in the dirt. No people, No sounds, just the campground arranged neatly, waiting. I turned in a slow circle. The clearing had no edge. The forest I had walked through was gone. All that remained was the loop. That night, I sat in the ranger station with every light blazing, my logbook spread across the desk. I tried radioing for help over and over, even though I knew it was pointless. Static answered. Once, through the static, I thought I heard my supervisor's voice, but he wasn't calling me by my name. He was saying it as though he were testing the sound, repeating it slowly, stretching the syllables, like something learning how to speak. I turned the radio off, and in the silence that followed, the vibration came again. It felt closer than ever. By the time the vibration came that night, I wasn't even pretending to patrol anymore. I sat at the desk in the ranger station staring at the logbook with a pen frozen in my hand. My handwriting looked jagged, slanted, like it belonged to someone else. Whole pages were filled with looping repetitions of the same phrase, "Stay awake, stay awake, stay awake." The clock on the wall clicked louder than it should have. The bulbs overhead hummed like they were about to burn out. Every nerve in my body was braced for that pulse in the ground. When it came, I knew immediately. The desk trembled under my elbows, not violently but insistently, as though the station itself was being lifted and set back down. My teeth ached again. My bones vibrated. I couldn't stay inside. The air in the station felt wrong, too close, too dense. I pushed out the door into the night. The campground shimmered at the edge of the darkness. It wasn't like a mirage, though. That's the closest word. The trees bent, their shadows stretching in unnatural arcs across the gravel. The creek's reflection rippled even though the water wasn't moving. And the RVs, lined like obedient soldiers, seemed to flex at the corners, their geometry subtly wrong, as if they were too perfect in their arrangement. My flashlight beam jittered in my shaking hands. I killed it. The light didn't make me feel safer anymore. I walked toward the creek. Every step felt like stepping onto a stage where something was waiting for me. The silence wasn't silence, it was listening. My boots crunched gravel and the sound didn't echo the way it should. It fell flat, swallowed by the air. When I reached the bank, the shimmer was undeniable. The water bent like glass under a hidden weight. The channel itself looked narrower than it had the day before, its edges pressing inward as though the earth was folding. And then, I swear I heard voices, not words, not language, just tones that mimicked human cadence. One low and drawn out, another clip too fast. They overlapped like static recordings. I crouched, heart hammering, and dipped the flashlight briefly toward the water. Something pale shifted below the surface, not a fish, not a log. Something shaped wrong, too smooth, too long. It slid back into the darkness without a ripple. The next morning, the boy was gone. I went straight to their RV, knocking hard on the door. The mother answered, eyes pale and dry, lips stretched into a smile that didn't falter even when I asked about him. "Who?" she said. I shoved past her. The inside smelled stale, metallic, like blood and ozone. The father sat at the dinette, hands flat on the table, staring at nothing. There were only 2 beds, only 2 sets of clothes. The boy had been erased, not just taken, as though he had never existed. My logbook had his name scrawled in frantic pen from the day before, but now it was smeared, letters dissolving into the paper like ink on wet skin. I ran outside before I could lose myself in that RV's walls. By then, I'd stopped pretending there would be rescue. My supervisor hadn't come. No other rangers, no state troopers, no weekend tourists with dogs and bright coolers. It was just me, the pale-eyed campers, and the loop, and the thing that moved it. I thought of the boy's warning, don't go near the creek, but the creek was where it was strongest, and if I was going to get out, I had to face it there. That night, I waited at the bank. I didn't bring the flashlight. I didn't bring the radio. Just the logbook, clutched like it could anchor me to what was real. The vibration came later than usual, long enough that I started to believe maybe I'd imagined it all. And then, like a drumbeat rolling up from the earth, it started. The water bent, the air shimmered, and something rose, At first, it looked like the creek bed itself was heaving upward, mud and reeds and stone pushing through the surface. But then it kept rising, taller than me, taller than the cottonwoods on the bank. It wasn't solid, not exactly. More like a distortion given shape. A mass of pale lines, edges that slid and reformed, bending like heat haze into the outline of something vast. And threaded through it were human sounds. Breaths. Whimpers. Voices repeating names that dissolved into static. My knees buckled. The logbook fell from my hands and landed open on the gravel. Pages fluttered, and for one sick moment, I thought I saw my own name written on every line. The shape leaned closer. The air grew dense, pulling at my chest, forcing me down. My ears filled with pressure. I don't remember screaming. I remember the taste of iron on my tongue. I remember the silence collapsing in on itself like a closing fist. And then, darkness. I woke in the ranger shed at dawn, face pressed into the logbook. My pen was still in my hand. At first, I thought I had dreamed everything. The creek, the shape, the pale-eyed campers, it was too insane to have been real. But when I opened the book, the last page was filled with writing I didn't remember making. You belong here now. The words repeated line after line until the page was black with ink. That day, the campground was empty. Every RV, every tent, every camper was gone. The sites were bare, as though no one had ever been there, except for the tire tracks. They crisscrossed the gravel, dozens of them, layered and deep, circling endlessly. I was the only one left. I don't know how many days have passed since then. The sun still rises and sets, though sometimes it rises in the wrong place. The loop still carries me back to the beginning, no matter which way I walk. The ranger station still hums with its buzzing lights, though the power lines outside have long since gone slack. And at night, the vibration comes. Always. Sometimes I hear names in it. Sometimes I hear my own. Sometimes when I look at the creek, I see RVs half submerged, their windows glowing faintly as though families are still inside. And sometimes I hear knocking from the water. I think the campground is moving still, not just rearranging its sites or pulling the loop tighter. I think it's moving across the land, folding itself into new places. Somewhere else, a family will pull in, set up camp, laugh around a fire, and in the morning, they'll wake up somewhere different, and by the time they notice, it will be too late. I am writing this not because I expect anyone to find it, but because I can't trust myself anymore. The words slip, the ink blurs, and some mornings I wake up with my logbook already filled. But if you're reading this, if somehow these pages made it past the loop, don't camp here. Don't even stop to rest. The campground moves. And once it takes you, it doesn't let go. I don't remember how I got out. That's the part that gnaws at me. Some days I wake in my apartment in town and convince myself I walked out the way I came in, down that gravel road, past the wooden sign and onto the state highway. Other days I'm certain I never left at all, that I'm still inside the loop and everything since has been an elaborate trick. Because the truth is, there's no clear line where the nightmare ended and the so-called waking world began. One moment, I was in the ranger station, scratching desperate words into my logbook, trying to tether myself to something real. The next, I was standing on the shoulder of the highway, the early light of dawn spilling across the asphalt. My truck was parked 20 feet away, keys in the ignition, tank full. No one stopped me as I drove. No one asked where I'd been. I left the Ranger Service after that season. I told them it was burnout, that I couldn't handle the isolation. They didn't argue. Seasonal staff come and go all the time. My supervisor barely looked up from his desk when I turned in my badge. But at night, when I try to sleep, I hear it still, that low vibration in my bones, the silence before the shift. Sometimes, if I lie awake long enough, the walls of my apartment feel like they're bending. My bed seems a few inches closer to the window. The shadows of the streetlights outside look sharper, aligned at wrong angles. And when I finally fall asleep, I wake up with the taste of iron in my mouth, as though I've been breathing the air of that campground again. A few months ago, I drove past the turnoff to the park. The sign was gone, just a blank post. The road was there, gravel leading off into the trees, but the entrance gate had been chained shut with rusted links. A hand-painted board leaned against it, closed for maintenance. I pulled over and stared at it for a long time. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of recent use, but the air smelled faintly metallic, like blood. I've tried to warn people in small ways, comments on camping forums, vague reviews left on travel sites, whispers at outdoor shops, but no one believes me. Why would they? The place doesn't even show up on most maps anymore. I went looking through my old logbook last week, the one I kept that season. I could have sworn I locked it away in a drawer when I moved. But when I opened it, the pages were blank, all except the last one, where the words had returned. You belong here now. I hear it again tonight, that vibration. It doesn't matter that I'm miles away in a town with streetlights and traffic noise and neighbors arguing through the walls. It doesn't matter that I swore I would never step foot in that park again. The campground moves, and I think it's moving closer. Last week, I was walking home from the grocery store just after dark. The streets were quiet, the kind of spring evening when the air still holds the chill of winter. I turned the corner onto my block, and that's when I saw it. An RV. Nothing unusual about that. This is Colorado, after all, and half the people here own one. But I knew this one. The faded stripes down its side, the bent ladder on the back. I'd written it down dozens of times in my logbook. It was Site 7. The porch light was on, yellow and warm against the siding. Through the window, I thought I saw shapes moving, a family sitting at a table, a boy staring out, his eyes wide and unblinking. I stopped in the street, every nerve in me screaming to look away. When I blinked, the curtains closed, and when I blinked again, the RV was gone. I told myself it was fatigue, a hallucination, some part of my memory bleeding through into waking life. But 2 nights later, I heard knocking on my wall, soft at first, like a branch in the wind, then louder, rhythmic. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. I froze in bed, holding my breath. It wasn't coming from the wall after all. It was coming from inside the apartment. This morning, I walked to my truck. There were tire tracks across the asphalt of the parking lot. Not like anyone had driven through, more like something had set down and pressed its weight into the ground before lifting again. And next to my truck, etched faintly into the pavement, was a circle. A loop. I don't sleep much anymore. I keep the lights on, the logbook open, the pen ready. Writing feels like the only thing that keeps me tethered. But the words don't always feel like mine. Sometimes when I wake, the book is already filled, with names I don't know, with campsites that don't exist, with directions that lead nowhere. I've stopped trying to warn people, not because I don't want to, God knows I do, but because I think the campground wants me quiet. Every time I speak about it, I hear that vibration in my chest, like the ground is waiting under my feet, like it's listening. And every time I see an RV parked on a side street or hear the hum of tires on gravel in the distance, I wonder if it's come for me again, because the campground doesn't stay in one place. It never did. If you find yourself in a quiet park one night, the air heavy and still, the silence pressing into your ears, don't ignore it. If you wake up and your view is different, if your campsite isn't where it was when you fell asleep, if your compass won't hold north, leave. Don't wait for morning. Don't wait for the vibration, because once the campground has you, there's no getting free. Not really. You'll carry it with you. And one night, when you least expect it, you'll hear knocking from the dark, and you'll know it's moved again. They found the logbook in a storage unit on the edge of town. The ranger's name was on the lease, but the payments had stopped years ago. When the facility finally auctioned the contents, the unit was nearly empty. Just a desk, a stack of uniforms, and the book. The buyer brought it to the sheriff's office because of the writing inside. Pages filled with campsite numbers. Dates that didn't line up with any known calendar. Diagrams of loops that folded into themselves. And in the margins, please written over and over, sometimes in block capitals, sometimes scrawled sideways as though done in panic. Don't sleep. Stay out of the creek, it wants names. The last entry had no date, no signature, just 3 words pressed so deep into the paper that the pen tore through. It's moving again. A deputy who handled the logbook quit 2 weeks later, said he couldn't stand the humming in his teeth whenever he touched it. A clerk swore the campsite numbers matched places in other parks across the state. Little-known campgrounds, most of them already closed. The book was locked in evidence, but every so often, the file clerk swears the log is sitting open on her desk when she comes in. Different page, different words. She never touches it. She just closes the cover and locks it back in the drawer. Last fall, a camper went missing in another county. State land, small campground off a Forest Service road. The man's wife reported that they'd gone to sleep parked near the tree line, but in the morning their trailer was angled by the creek. She said she woke alone. And when the rangers arrived, they found tire tracks circling the campground, layered over and over until the gravel had compacted into a perfect ring. No footprints, no sign of the man. I think about that sometimes, how stories bleed from one place into another. How a park can be shut down, a name erased from maps, and yet something still carries forward. Because you can close a gate, you can pull down a sign, you can mark a road as washed out, but you can't bury something that moves. The logbook still circulates. I've heard whispers of it showing up in ranger cabins, in back offices of state parks, in the hands of seasonal staff who don't last a season, always with new writing inside, always with the same warning beneath it all. The campground moves, and sooner or later it moves closer.